Good afternoon. We're beginning the Senate Judiciary Public Safety Committee. Today's date is April 9th. It is Tuesday and beautiful outside for the day. Today's agenda includes a bill presentation, testimony, committee action, and a final vote. Members, we will remain in the committee until we're complete with the agenda. Starting out today, we're going to have Mr. Turner walk through the spreadsheet. Mr. Turner.
Mr. Chairman, members. You should have in your packets a regular spreadsheet, which boils down to the budget into a document that we can write a bill with. And then I passed out kind of a mini spreadsheet, which boils down the spreadsheet, which I will go over in a second, into Senator Limmer's priorities with a $25 million target. First of all, I'd like to say the governor's initiatives totaled $225 million over a base of $2.36 billion, an increase of 9.6%. The governor's tails totaled $243 million over the same base, or 10.3%. Chairman Limmer was given a budget target of $25 million over base, an increase of 1.1%, with $25 million in tails for 22 and 23, again 1.1% over base. As you can see on the mini spreadsheet, Chairman Limmer funded agency health insurance requests for 20 and 21, but did not fund the 22-23 tails. He partially funded the Department of Corrections request for new security guards and prison security technology, and greatly increased the tails for security in 22 and 23. In addition, he funded most of the small agencies in the budget at the governor's request, funded the deficiency in the peace officers training account, and funded one Senate grant program, as well as DOC beds for a number of criminal enhancements passed by the committee. Finally, in order to meet his target in the 2021 biennium, he cut the general fund base for police training by $3 million each year. Now I'll move to the real spreadsheet. First of all, the mechanics of reading the spreadsheet. Starting from the left, you have agency and initiative titles. Then the fund, whether general or other. Moving right, the next column is the current biennium, 18 and 19. Then the governor's rec for 20 and 21. Governor's tails for 22 and 23. And then we get to the chairman's rec for 20 and 21. And chairman tails for 22 and 23. For the first item, I'll kind of go over it quickly or slowly. As an example, on line 3, you have Supreme Court Operations, our first agency. That on the title line is the base budget, or the current spending budget. Beneath that are decision items or governor's initiatives. In this case, we have the base budget plus 4 decision items. They total approximately $8.7 million. And in this case, Chairman Limmer chose to only fund the increase for judge and employee health insurance with no tails in 22-23. Move on to civil legal services. The governor recommended $4.2 million in increase. Chair Limmer only funded $436,000 for the Senate health care. Move on to Court of Appeals. We have the base budget plus 3 items: employee compensation, judge compensation, and judge employee health insurance increases. Chairman Limmer only funded the health insurance increases with no tails. It's basically the same story in the district court. It's the base budget plus 7 decision items: employee compensation, judge compensation, health insurance, 2 new judges, mandated psychological services, treatment court and sustainability, 5 different courts. And then the governor funded the extreme risk protection order gun bill. Chairman Limmer funds the judge and employee health insurance increases with no tails. Move to the next page, the guardian ad litem of the base budget plus 4 governor's decision items. Salary and health increase, compliance with state and federal mandates, the guardian ad litem board development and training, technology upgrades and enhancements. Chairman Limmer funded the health insurance increases only at $468,000 with no tails. The tax court of the base budget plus 1 decision item, $251,000 for an e-filing and remote access helpline. The chairman recommends base funding only. Uniform Laws Commission, we have base funding and an operating adjustment of $10,000, and the chairman concurs with the governor on that item. Move on to the Board of Judicial Standards. We have the base budget plus 2 items, an operating adjustment, and an online complaint website update. The operating adjustment is $61,000. The chairman concurs with that and does not fund the online complaint website update. Then we move to the Public Defense Board. We have base budget plus 5 items, compensation increases, health insurance, Hennepin County cost share, new staff, 50 attorneys and 58 support staff, and public defender corporations. The chairman funded the health insurance increases for the public defender with no tails in 22 and 23. Move to page 3, sentencing guidelines. We have a base budget plus an operating adjustment of $24,000, and the chair concurs with the governor. The Department of Public Safety, the first division is Homeland Security and Emergency Management. We have the base budget plus 2 items, School Safety Center and Minute contract increases. The chairman declined to fund those 2, but he did fund 1 Senate initiative, Senate File 2034, the supplemental nonprofit security grants, one time for $300,000. Move to the BCA. We have base budget plus 6 general fund items. Quickly, they are the automated fingerprint ID system, or AFIS, the replacement of that system, predatory crime personnel, 3 agents, 1 analyst, FBI cybersecurity compliance through Minute, 6 positions, the vulnerable adult investigation staffing, 2 agents, another gun bill, the gun permit background check system that the governor funds, and then Minute contract increases. The chairman did not fund any of these general fund initiatives. The next line is 120. On the spreadsheet, the drug crime staff, that's from the opioid stewardship fund. It was placed here. The opioid stewardship fund is now being carried in the opioid bill. Right now, the opioid bill is carrying $384,000 to the BCA for 3 drug scientists. The governor's request here was for 10 personnel, 6 scientists, an analyst, and 3 agents. Real quick, before I leave this page, on line 101, 103, I kind of skipped over that. The disaster contingency account transfer is for $20 million. I mention it here because it's in Homeland Security and Emergency Management. The chairman did not fund that with general fund money. I will get to that item later. On the note, it says line 246. For those sticklers among you, that's an error. It's actually line 248. And then we move on to page 4. Some special revenue accounts. The fire marshal, which is funded entirely with fire safety account, with the base budget plus one decision item, minute contract increases. The chairman concurs with the governor's rec on that. Same with the firefighter training board. It's just base budget from the fire safety account, and the chairman concurs. Gambling and alcohol enforcement, we have a general fund base and a special revenue fund base, no governor's initiatives, and chairman concurs with the base only budget. Move on to the Office of Justice Programs. We have the base budget plus two initiatives, a minute contract increase line, and the Indigenous Women's Murdered and Missing Women's Task Force. The chairman chose not to fund either of those initiatives. Then we have a special revenue agency, the Emergency Communication Networks, which it's funded through the 9/11 Emergency Fund. We have a base budget in special revenue and one line item and increase, and the chair concurs with the governor's budget. We move on to the post board. The post board has two bases, at least this biennium. It has a special revenue base funded out of the Peace Officers Training Account, and it has a general fund base, which was put into place 2 years ago, of $6 million for police training. That general fund base sunsets at the end of fiscal year 21. The post board requested a rules coordinator. The chairman did not fund that request. As I mentioned earlier in the overview, to meet his target, the chairman needed an additional $6 million. He cut the $6 million annual general fund appropriation for police training reimbursement in half, took $3 million each year. Move on to the private detective board. We have a base funding plus one initiative, critical oversight activity, one FTE, and the chairman chose to just fund the base. Move on to the Human Rights Department. We have the base budget plus 5 initiatives, an operating adjustment, on-base updates, which is a management software, civic engagement project, 2 FTEs, the opening of regional offices in Bemidji, Duluth, Rochester, and Worthington, and ban the box for housing, which is 2 FTEs. The chairman chose to only fund the health insurance premium increases for the Department of Human Rights employees, and once again, no tails in 22 and 23. Then we move to the Department of Corrections. The governor's budget had a base budget plus 4 initiatives. Employee compensation, prison security and safety, which is a mix and match of a number of things, offender health care, and juvenile correctional management system. The chairman chose to fund the health insurance premium increases for all Department of Corrections employees, and then under prison security and safety, he funded $4,762,000 each year. In the bill, that comes to $2,762,000 for personnel and $2 million for technological upgrades. That $2.7 million would come out to about 38 COs. The second year, it'd be 66 COs. And then, as I said, the tails, he increases dramatically to 11.2 in 22 and 23. That would be, it would come out to 155 personnel, but that would, like I said, that line encompasses many things, and including infrastructure and various security technology enhancements. So it'd probably be a combination of personnel and other security measures. Then the chairman does not fund the offender health care or the juvenile correctional management system initiative. The next four lines, 215 to 218, are Senate initiatives funding DOC bed estimates for criminal provisions in Senate File 111 and House File 15.
Thank you.
Yeah, that'll do it for correctional institutions. Move on to community services on page 6. We have the base budget plus 8 initiatives. We have employee compensation. Once again, the Senate funded employee compensation insurance only at $1,045,000. The Senate chose not to fund the other 7 items: prison security, pretrial assessment, intensive supervised release, integrated offender case management, transitional housing and electronic monitoring, victim notification, and family and reentry programming. Then finally, we move on to operations support within the Department of Corrections. The base budget plus 2 initiatives, employee compensation, and an initiative for prison security, staff, and technology upgrades within operations support itself. And once again, the chairman funded the health insurance for the operations support employees. Then we move down to line 248, the general fund transfer to the disaster contingency account. It's in section 16 of the bill, and what it does is it transfers up to $20 million into the account if the general fund exceeds, at the end of the biennium, the projected balance. And if you remember, this is how the legislature funded the disaster relief 2 years ago. And so if you're optimistic, it'll be funded. Moving on, revenue adjustments. The chairman and the committee was stuck with funding the decline in criminal and traffic surcharge revenues, which has been going on and we've been tracking with the Post Board for a couple of years now. And as you know, the Post Board is funded by the first 39% of the first $25 of the criminal and traffic surcharge. The number of surcharges has been going down. It's fallen, the account has fallen below the appropriation that the legislature must give. The Post Board doesn't get that money automatically. It only gets what we appropriate. There is now a deficit, and that deficit has to be made up. And that costs in this biennium $1.1 million and $1.7 million in the second biennium. That net transfer is on line 265. And then at the end, we have totals, and we have one final initiative. The governor wants to reinstate the railroad and pipeline assessment. It's a special revenue account, and the chairman chose not to reinstate the assessment, and that's on line 280. And Mr. Chairman, that is the judiciary budget.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Turner. Senator Limmer, do you want to move your amendment and then go through the DEA2 amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I move the A2 amendment to delete everything amendment.
Members, you all have that? Okay. Whenever you're ready to go through it, Senator Limmer.
Well, let me make my introductory comments, Mr. Chair. To begin, you may have noticed that there is no policy language in this bill, and that is not attached to money. I believe it's very important for us to comply with the constitutional single subject rule. We've created that pattern for many years out of this committee, although other committees don't follow that same policy or direction from our Constitution. And our target, I will admit, is a relatively low target of $25 million for the biennium over the base for 2 years of this full biennium. Many of you think, and many in the audience may think, that this target is inadequate to address the functions in their respective departments and agencies. So do I. I have originally disagreed with the $25 million target, but nevertheless, it's the target that we have been given. Working within this exercise, I've decided to be as responsible as possible with the additional funds that we've been given. Most of our budget is driven by personnel costs. For example, people make up the services provided by the courts. People are staffing our prisons. People are running the labs at the BCA. And our staff's health insurance costs have continued to go up, even with additional costs paid for by employees. In this budget, employee health insurance costs are covered across the board, and this takes up most of that target we've been given. In addition to employee health insurance, and I do have to admit it's been a difficult decision, and that was how to address the problems in our prisons, especially the difficult times for our corrections officers. It might not be the popular choice, but I'm reallocating some funds from the law enforcement grants to pay for more prison guards. There are other initiatives that I believe are important enough that we must include them today. Appropriate penalties for certain sex offenses and a small amount of money in security grants for terrorist threats against religious organizations. This bill enhances penalties for persons who produce or sell child pornography, particularly when the victims involve minors under the age of 13, or the offender is a repeat offender. And the bill enhances the penalty and requires predatory offender registration for surreptitious or secret intrusion if a person records a minor victim and the recording was done knowingly with sexual intent. The bill also expands the person of authority definition to include those who have held the position within the previous 120 days for purposes of criminal sexual conduct. This bill prohibits a peace officer from sexually contacting a person who is restrained by the police officer. Under current law, there already exists a list of occupations in the criminal sexual conduct statutes for which consent to the activity is not a defense to the criminal sexual conduct crime. And those occupations would include clergy, psychologists, massage therapists, prison guards, and other similar professions where there is a position of trust or authority. This bill adds law enforcement officers to the list in the context of detainees who are not free to leave detainment. This bill tracks the costs of House File 15. That bill, we heard in this committee, the elimination of the marital rape defense that shields participants in voluntary relationships from prosecution for certain criminal sexual conduct offenses. And the policy in House File 15 is traveling separately. The bill instructs the Sentencing Guidelines Commission to comprehensively review and consider modifying how the sentencing guidelines and the sex offender grid addresses certain crimes mentioned in this bill as compared to similar crimes, including other sex offenses and other offenses with similar maximum penalties. This bill also creates a one-time competitive grant opportunity for nonprofit organizations which are at risk of being the victims of violent extremism, and to partner with the state to improve their security infrastructure by supplementing an ongoing federal grant program through the Department of Homeland Security. Finally, as was mentioned, we borrowed an initiative that was started by Senator Cohen a number of years ago, and that is to top off the funds for the disaster assistance contingency account, which has been used successfully in the past couple years. And in closing, at least this portion of introduction, Mr. Chair, and I want to repeat the comment that I made earlier. There are going to be people that think that this proposal, this budget is inadequate for their needs. And I will say I agree with that as well. However, the way this works, we get our targets from the Finance Committee and we move with them. And we still have over a month of session left. And I am going to do everything I can to bolster this budget as we go forward. And at that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for conversation or discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Limmer. We're going to go on to the testifiers.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
Before I begin,
Senator Limmer.
I have one amendment to the DE amendment. And it seems like it's a technical one, but I'll have Mr. Turner explain.
Mr. Turner.
And that would be the A4 amendment? Is that what it is? A4, yeah. And we'll get it passed out.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Turner.
Mr. Chairman, members, what the A4 amendment does is it makes the supplemental security grants one time rather than ongoing. This was inadvertently left out of the bill. It is simply a sentence that says this is a one-time appropriation on page 4, line 21.
Senator Limmer moves the A4 amendment to the A2 delete all. Members, any questions? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. The A4 has now been adapted to the A2. So, Senator Limmer,
Stay close.
we will go to other testifiers then. We have 18 testifiers at this point. Testifiers, if you'll understand, you have 2.5 minutes to make your comments. Please keep your comments as short as possible since it is a lengthy agenda we have. And members will hold questions till after all testimony is complete. So we will start off with Mr. Schorber. And if Ms. Haas could come up also, and we'll try to keep both chairs full as we go through.
Good afternoon,
Mr.
Chair,
Schorber.
members of the committee. My name is Jeff Schorba, and I'm the State Court Administrator.
Schorba.
On behalf of the Minnesota Judicial Council and judges and staff across the state, I'm here today to share our concerns about the budget proposal before you today, which fails to fund so many of the critical needs of our courts. The Chief Justice and I have met with each of you individually over the past several months, so given your time constraints today, I won't cover everything in our funding request, but I do want to call the committee's attention to the impact this budget proposal would have on our court's ability to be partners in Minnesota's work to combat drug abuse and addiction in our state. Over the past 5 years, we have seen a 36% rise in the number of felony and gross misdemeanor drug possession cases filed in our district courts. As you are well aware, the rise of opioid and meth abuse in our state is having a devastating impact on communities across Minnesota. Given the complexity and time-consuming nature of these serious crimes, this spike has increased the number of judges our courts need to efficiently and effectively manage our rising caseload. The budget request we submitted to the legislature asked for funding to ensure we have the judges and skilled staff necessary to meet this rising caseload. Unfortunately, the budget request before you today does not provide any new funding for additional judges in our district courts. In addition, there are 5 treatment courts in the state that are at risk of closing if the budget proposal before you is passed into law. As the committee knows from our earlier presentations, treatment courts have become one of the most effective criminal justice tools we have to combat the rise of opioids and other drug addiction in Minnesota. They have been proven to reduce recidivism, provide long-term cost savings to taxpayers, and improve outcomes for those struggling with addiction and mental health issues. We recognize that this committee was put in a very difficult position given your modest budget target and the significant number of worthy funding requests you received this session. But we hope that you will consider the impact this budget proposal would have on our courts and our broader justice system as you head into conference committee. We are committed to working with Chair Limmer and others over the next 6 weeks and remain hopeful that the legislature and governor will reach agreement on a budget proposal that adequately funds the judicial branch. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Next up in the open seat will be Mr. Berg. Ms. Haas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Nancy Haas with Mesterly and Kramer here on behalf of the Minnesota District Judges Association. My comments today on the budget are threefold: disappointment, understanding, and hope. On behalf of MDJA, the trial courts are disappointed your budget was not able to include either pay raises for judges or the 2 new judgeships requested. These items are of great importance to the trial courts. We understand the difficult position the chair and this committee were in with such a low budget target, and thus were not able to make meaningful and strategic investments in the areas of judicial pay and judicial workload improvements. The ability to provide judicial pay increases is important to be able to attract and retain the best and brightest judges. It also helps to ensure we have varied experience and expertise in our judicial branch. For example, we want private sector attorneys to find judicial service as attractive as it is to the public sector attorneys, and compensation is an important component of that consideration. In fact, you will hear next from the Compensation Council about the importance of the ability to recruit qualified candidates, especially in Greater Minnesota. We are hopeful this information and the next steps in the budget process will allow you to move from 0 pay raises for judges to a meaningful increase based on the sound data provided by way of several reports via our economist and the Compensation Council. As a reminder, MDJA presented to this committee earlier this session, and our economist report of August 2018 suggests a nominal pay increase of 5%, which would yield a real salary increase of 3%. We look forward to continuing this dialogue with you in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Haas. In the empty seat will be Mr. Schaefer and Mr. Berg, if you go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Limmer and members of the committee. My name is Tom Berg. I chair the Compensation Council you just heard from, and chaired it actually in 2017 as well. And I previously had the opportunity to sit on your side of the table back, I guess I should say, in the other body over here for about 8 years, way back when. And I know what a difficult job you have, and I heard Chairman Limmer talk about the difficulty of fitting all of this into a tight budget, and I appreciate that. I also learned to pay attention to the chair and keep your testimony short, and that you have more negotiations ahead. The Compensation Committee is made of 16 people, 8 appointed by the governor, 1 from each congressional district, 8 by the Supreme Court Justice, Justice Gilday. They each get 4 Republicans and 4 Democrats. It's a very bipartisan operation. 5 of the 16 of us were lawyers. We took our job seriously. It was a very nonpartisan operation and deliberation. And we considered the 3 things that the statute requires that we consider. And I quote, the amount of compensation paid in government service and the private sector to persons with similar qualifications. Secondly, compensation needed to attract and retain experienced and competent persons. And thirdly, the ability of the state to pay for all this stuff. And we tried to consider that very seriously and work on it. We had 3 hearings. We heard some of the same testimony you've heard of, but I'm not going to go over all of that. Our recommendations are on page 6 of our report to you, which we've been informed is in your file. My main point in the limited time that I have here is to stress to you, each and every one of you, the importance of, to all of your constituents and everybody in Minnesota, about the need for knowledgeable and understanding judges. And let me just briefly illustrate that. I mentioned 5 of us have been in a lot of courtrooms, including myself, around the state. And the type of cases that we get, for example, a small business. People worked all their life to put this together. Several partners working together, all of a sudden something goes south and they end up suing each other. Somebody alleges the other one was cooking the books or it was fraud, and you had to deal with that. I personally once tried, and I've only tried one of these, a termination of parental rights, where the state deemed it necessary to take the child out of a home, put it in a foster home. Foster parents loved the child, wanted to adopt. The natural parents all of a sudden decided they have had their act together, and they opposed the termination, and it was terrible and rigorous and emotional. And think about that. Put yourself in the position of those litigants, and you realize what you need in a judge. And the last thing was, I had the privilege of serving as the United States Attorney here and tried some horrendous criminal cases and worked very closely with several county attorneys and all of that. And you're dealing with, and it's going on right now in Hennepin County, the issues of the defendant and their family, the victim and their family, the media wanting to be in and watch everything, and it's just extremely time. So my point is, it's really tough, and I hope you think about it, the critical it is to the functioning of our state. And we need competitive salaries to attract those people. You've heard the testimony, and it's in our recommendation. So I thank you for the opportunity to testify. And just as a postscript, if I might, Mr. Chairman, I would urge you in the interim or something to take a look at the scheduling of our committee, the Compensation Council. It's a holdover from before we had the constitutional amendment and the Legislative Salary Council. So our recommendation is actually out into the future for 21 and 22. And it's really tough to do the job right. I think we have a suggestion for you. It's in there, and I think actually the staffs could work that out, and it'd be a pretty simple bill and help solve the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Berg.
Thank you.
Mr. Schaefer is up, and we have 2 from the Guardian at Lightham. If they'd like to come up, take the 2 chairs here. Mr. Schaefer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to all members of the committee. Appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. I'm speaking on behalf of Civil Legal Services statewide here in Minnesota, and want to let you know that we understand the challenging task that you face in putting together a budget, and we thank you for your thoughtful consideration of our request and your support for a modest increase in our funding to help offset a part of the unavoidable increases in health care costs we have experienced. We bid our health insurance out every year, and we take every step we can to minimize those costs, and we've continued to face steady and significant increases in this fixed cost, which affects our bottom line. We respectfully ask you going forward to consider our full request, especially the portion we hope to invest in covering unavoidable increases in health care costs we've experienced and anticipate going forward in the coming years. The state appropriation is absolutely critical to us to addressing that issue and making those investments, and without an increase in funding, we simply cannot maintain our current service level due to the erosion of revenue that's caused by the rising fixed costs we experience in this space. And for the same reason, we respectfully renew our request for additional funding to invest in minimal salary improvement, so we can stem the tide of growing turnover we face in our offices with new attorneys who started legal aid but then can't afford to stay. And they move to other public sector jobs, not to the private sector, because their hearts are in public service. This happens because our average starting salary is $48,763 a year. significantly lower than any other public sector attorneys. Our request would allow us to make modest investments to improve our average salary to over $50,000 for a year one attorney. This would still be far lower than any other public agency or public sector employer, but it's a start, and it's critical to maintaining our current service level. We've fallen behind our partners in the justice system on the healthcare and salary fronts over the last decade, during which time civil legal services funding has been flat. For this reason, we ask you to fund our request to the full extent outlined in the civil legal services change item to allow us to deliver on the promise of equal justice for all for the Minnesotans statewide that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you. Taking the empty chair then would be Commissioner Lucero. And if you two ladies would introduce yourself as you begin to speak and give your testimony.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair and members. And thank you for providing an opportunity to testify. My name is Kristen Trebel-Helbersma, and I'm here today representing the Guardian Ad Litem Board and the program staff.
Good afternoon. My name is Tammy Baker-Olson.
And Tammy is the new program administrator as of today. So I will be testifying today, and she will be taking over moving forward. So over the past 2 years, you've heard me testify to the dire need our program has for additional funding. The bill as presented will only provide our agency with minimal funding to cover the anticipated insurance costs for the next biennium. We realize and appreciate that there are many competing financial needs and that resources are very limited. Nevertheless, we ask that you reconsider the funding provided for the Guardian Ad Litem Board. As I previously testified, we have over 500 children that are not assigned an advocate to represent them and their best interests in court as a result of our inadequate funding. Our funding request is focused on two primary areas: addressing federal and state mandates to ensure all abused and neglected children are assigned a guardian ad litem and obtain one, and secondly, to allow for further implementation of the Office of the Legislative Auditor's recommendations that were provided to all of us last year. We respectfully seek your support regarding our budget request and ask that you provide your support for the children that we serve. Our program and board are committed to continuing to enhance the services that we currently provide. However, we need additional funding to continue to do so. You may recall that last year this committee was in support of our supplemental funding request. Again, we urge you to reconsider the funding provided in the bill to include our request for compliance with the federal and state mandates, increased employee compensation, technology enhancements, and board training and development. The abused and neglected children are the state's most vulnerable population, and their best interests and well-being are of utmost importance. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And taking the empty chair will be Mr. Grove and Commissioner Lucero. If you'd introduce yourself first.
Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Lucero, and I'm the Commissioner for the Department of Human Rights. It's great to be with you all this afternoon. So I want to start out by just talking quickly about Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan's budget for One Minnesota. It lays out a bold vision for the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, one that makes a transformative investment in our work to ensure that all Minnesotans are able to live joyful lives, free from discrimination and rich with opportunity. This includes expanding our presence throughout Minnesota with offices in Bemidji, Duluth, and Worthington. The Senate's budget proposal does not include any of these positive investments from the governor's budget. This is a missed opportunity, and I share Chair Limmer's disappointment on this. We've seen the success and the need from our St. Cloud Regional Office, where the number of interactions with community members has nearly doubled compared to this time a year ago. Expanding that effort to Bemidji, Duluth, and Worthington will help the residents of those communities in similarly positive ways. So we have a rapidly changing Minnesota. We're getting older. We're facing higher rates of disabilities. Those are oftentimes interconnected. We are also getting more racially diverse across all of Minnesota. So our department has been in play for over 50 years, but the importance of being present across Minnesota continues to grow and becomes more essential with every passing year. I think it's really important to ground our work in the lives of real Minnesotans, because that's what I'd love for you to hold as you go back and make these tough decisions. So I'd like to conclude this by telling you the story of Mr. Henrik. You may have heard me mention this story before, but I think it's an important story, and it's representative of many of the cases and stories that we hear every single day. So Mr. Henrik is from Alexandria, and he worked for 20 years at a desk job, typing away, doing IT work. When he contracted a severe infection from complications due to diabetes, and as a result, his leg was amputated. When he got back to work from medical leave, his IT desk job now required him to climb into tight spaces and climb ladders, something that had never been required of him over 2 decades of work. When he requested an accommodation, he was met with hostility and later told to resign or be fired. The Minnesota Department of Human Rights negotiated a settlement with the employer that resulted in policy changes, training, and a monetary settlement for the employer. So Governor Walz's proposed budget makes investments to ensure that all Minnesotans, like Mr. Henrik and many others, are able to live lives free from discrimination in thriving and welcoming communities. The Senate's current proposal does not match those needed investments. And as this budget process moves forward, I urge you to consider the full funding for the Department of Human Rights. Please let me know how I can be of any assistance in this moving forward. Thank you for everything you're doing. Have a great day.
Thank you, Commissioner. Taking the empty seat would be the Chief Gottschalk then, and Mr. Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Nate Gove, Executive Director of the Minnesota Post Board. I do want to thank Chair Limmer for his support of increasing the percentage of the surcharge directed to the Post Board to shore up our current budget shortfall in the next biennium. 2 areas of this bill that obviously disappoint the board and law enforcement as well. And we're certainly hopeful that you will reconsider and we'll be in a position to work with you on any matter related to it. But I don't want to go overboard on the reduction of the training money, as I know there are other law enforcement officers here that will be testifying to that, but $6 million over the biennium. I would just point out to the committee that the peace officer training mandate bill passed several years ago is not fully implemented. A $3 million per fiscal year reduction would be over $300 per officer, or over $600 over the biennium. That is quite significant, as 75% of the law enforcement agencies in Minnesota have 25 or less officers. For greater Minnesota, the smaller agencies, they make up a very strong commitment of the training dollars, but without state help, it becomes very difficult, especially to meet the training mandates, which currently 24 to 32 continuing education hours of an officer's license are now state mandated in a 3-year period. And just by way of the current renewal period, 72% of the officers have over 60 continuing education credits. I think that demonstrates a real local commitment to being the very best they can for their committees or for their communities. And so they're not just meeting the minimum, they're greatly exceeding it. So I ask you to reconsider. I understand that's a difficult decision that the chair had to make on that. Concerning the Post Board's rulemaking, FTE, again, this has been an initiative of the board since I took over 5 years ago. The board is statutorily directed to promulgate rules. Our rules are in need of amending and updating. Police practices are constantly under scrutiny. The board needs to be responsive to that, and interagency agreements for help on that have not been successful. So I ask you to consider that, as it really puts the Post Board in a difficult position when we cannot update our rules adequately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Grove. At the empty seat then would be Sheriff Leslie. And Chief, if you'd introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Matt Gottschalk, and I'm the Chief of Police in Corcoran. Today I'm testifying on behalf of the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association, and Mr. Gove spoke extensively to the issue, so I'll try and be brief on the topic. But Today, on behalf of the Minnesota Chiefs of Police, we oppose the bill. We appreciate the difficult decisions you're making, but we can't support the legislature continuing to sunset important training dollars. Our association, along with others in law enforcement field, came forward with a training proposal 2 years ago because we believe every police officer in the state will benefit from training in the areas of recognizing and valuing diversity and cultural differences, conflict management and mediation, and crisis intervention. In addition to the training mandates, we also ask for additional money because this type of training is costly and the majority of cities simply don't have the means to pay for it. A majority of the police departments in Minnesota have fewer than 10 officers and many have 5 or fewer. Many of these departments have annual training budgets of only a few $1,000s. The reimbursement dollars that these cities receive from the state make up most, if not all, of their training budgets. If we really want to maintain a high level of professionalism we're striving for in the policing profession, we need a long-term investment, and this bill cuts the investment in our police officers and in our communities by $6 million. So in closing, I'll reiterate that in the law enforcement community, we ask for this training, we believe in this training, and it's important that this training continues, and the reimbursement dollars are critical to that happening. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chief. In the empty chair then would be Senator Harrington. Commissioner Harrington. Sheriff Leslie.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members, Tim Leslie representing the Minnesota Sheriff's Association. I'm also representing the MPPOA in my comments as well. Thank you for funding law enforcement at that $12 million biennial rate. It's really having an effect. And rather than say some of the things that have already been said, I'm just going to read a police report that happened 11 days ago to emphasize how this is having a practical effect on how we do policing in the state of Minnesota. On March 29th at 11:40 hours, Deputy Jim O'Meara was dispatched to Highway 61 and Lawrence Way for what dispatch described as a black male with a red shirt and jeans walking on the shoulder. He was described as waving his arms around and acting crazy. Dispatch also mentioned that we had multiple calls, up to 8 calls on this individual as well. Now, if you're familiar with Hastings, this is 5 miles south of Hastings. The only place you're going to is either Red Wing or to King's to get a hamburger in Meesville. I located the male walking south on the northbound lane of 61, just at 230th Street. I asked the male, later identified as Perry Dontel, if he wouldn't mind speaking with me in front of my fully marked squad car. As he approached my patrol vehicle, his demeanor immediately changed. He became erratic and hyper. I observed his arms to be waving up and down in a restless motion. He couldn't stand still for very long and was struggling to follow my directions. I asked Mr. Dontel what he was doing so far out into the county. He appeared to be speaking to himself when he replied, "I'm talking with my Lyft driver on the phone." I did not observe a phone. I did not observe an earpiece. I told him I couldn't see a telephone device, which he replied, "You ain't got the gifts I do. I'm gifted." I determined Mr. Dontel to be having some sort of crisis and advised dispatch to start medics from mental health evaluation. This is the impact that this training money has provided. Jim O'Meara is a graduate of the 40-hour crisis intervention training that this funding provided to us. This is an ongoing effort. This gets us ahead of the issues of use of force because it provides cognitive and the training that for the mental part of the job that we so need desperately. Thank you so much for funding us. Please bring us back to the $12 million rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Good illustration. Commissioner, my apologies for degrading you with the Senate issue there. On the empty chair will be Commissioner Schnell. And so, Commissioner Harrington, please.
Thank you very much. As I was noting for Senator Limmer, I actually brought my Senate pen just to be on the safe side today that I would be allowed into this august body. So I must admit that I am disappointed that this bill does not fund Governor Walz' 2021 general fund budget requests. I would remind the group that public safety is one of those core government functions that it's not a nice to have, it is a have to have. It is one of those things that we absolutely, that every Minnesotan depends on. And our budget was really written to speak to those have to haves. I'm disappointed to say that we did not get the funding for the Indigenous Women's Task Force. For far too long, missing and murdered women from the Native American community have gone unremarked and unnoticed and uninvestigated, and I feel it's a dereliction of our duty to not fund this and to move forward to find how these women are disappearing and then to be able to stop it. In addition to that, improved investigations to protect our most vulnerable, whether it's our seniors in the community or young people who are being preyed upon by scam artists and sexual predators. I know it's been mentioned as a priority, and yet we do not see the funding that would support this really worthy initiative here. Information technology, while it's not glamorous, is definitely a part and parcel of modern-day police work, and it is critical to the infrastructure of the Department of Public Safety. Without the funding that we've asked for, we cannot fix the security problems we have in our basic computer systems. If we do not fix those, we're out of compliance with the FBI, and that shuts us off from needed information for us, and we're the conduit for the local and county sheriffs. So it really does compromise our ability to fight terrorism, to prevent crime, and to be responsive. I just look back in my calendar and looking forward, and both of them are significant dates. March 20th, 2005. That's the Red Lake shooting day. And then April 20th coming up in 1999, that was Columbine. We're getting buried with requests at the School Safety Center for technical assistance to try and help them figure out how to not be the next Columbine, how not to be the next Red Lake. And once again, it is, I believe, crucial at this time that we fund those school safety positions. We have an automated fingerprint system that is now more than a decade old. We saw a 129% increase in its usage. Without that technology, individuals who are accused of crimes linger in jails, linger in correctional facilities while they're waiting to have exculpatory evidence brought forward. And in some cases, fingerprints of wanted individuals are left unprocessed because we do not have the technology to be able to accurately process them. And those folks remain as predators out in our community. I know that it looks like a beautiful day. You mentioned that early on, but I'm reminded that we've got 6 to 8 or more inches of snow coming, and spring floods are coming also. And so while we appreciate that the disaster contingent account was funded, it does not give the certainty to the local governments that they're going to have money when it's necessary. Pipeline safety and security needs that funding to get those assessments and those technologies and those trainings out to the local government. We would love to see all of those things funded. We know that the chairman and all of you are in a tough spot with what the targets were. But we want to be involved in this conversation. We have to be involved in this conversation. We really do believe that this is not a matter of convenience. This is a matter of life and death. This is a matter of people's liberty. And I think those are too important for us to negotiate away. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Up next in the empty chair will be Mr. Hall. Commissioner Schnell.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Paul Schnell, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Commissioner of Corrections for Minnesota. I first want to extend my gratitude to Chair Limmer and members of this committee for the hard work to address issues related to public safety in Minnesota. I understand that lawmakers must work to develop a sound state budget, and the Department of Corrections must deliver a solid plan and associated budget that serves the correctional and overall safety interests of the people of Minnesota. While I represent the Department of Corrections, I'm also concerned about the Department of Public Safety, the Department of Human Rights, our courts, and all the boards that are represented here in this budget. I also understand that you must make difficult decisions as you consider budget requests in front of your committee and the budget targets that are established for you. I'm grateful that your budget invests in health insurance costs for our employees as well as critical security positions. While this is affirming and positive, I am concerned that the committee's current budget proposal actually compromises the safety of our prisons and, in the end, our communities. I'm here today to urge you to consider the governor's recommendations for funding for the Department of Corrections. The Walz-Flanagan budget for One Minnesota invests in a multifaceted approach to ensuring safety inside the Department of Corrections facilities and in our communities across Minnesota. This includes critical security staffing inside of our facilities as well as staffing in our communities. The governor's budget lays out a robust investment in public safety funding by investing in intensive case management, victim notification services, critical physical and behavioral health services, restrictive housing reform, and essential reentry services and programming. As you know, 95% of those incarcerated in our prisons will return to communities across our state. Central to the work of the DOC is improving public safety, and we accomplish this by providing effective interventions and rehabilitative services. The Senate budget, as currently proposed, will result in the release of people who have not received the full array of treatment, educational, and mental health interventions that will ultimately lead to improved community safety outcomes through the reduction of reoffending. The proposed budget also weakens the ability of the DOC and our county probation and community corrections partners to effectively monitor and supervise high-risk offenders in our communities. Despite a constitutional mandate that Minnesota provide health care to incarcerated offenders in our prisons, the budget proposal does not provide funding for prison health care. If this budget were to become a reality, we will need to cut programming, including behavioral health and treatment programming within our facilities. The proposed budget will also make us unable to continue efforts to expand vocational and educational programming, which reduces risk inside of our facilities, because as we know, idle inmates result in an increase in safety-related incidents or assaults. Our emphasis on safety stems from the grim reminder of July and September of 2018, when two direct corrections officers lost their lives, Officer Joe Gom and Officer Joe Parisi. Our focus also reflects the reality that safety is the most basic of human needs. The deaths of these officers serves as a reminder of the inherent danger of service in the field of corrections and the need for our state to invest in security personnel to bolster corrections staff safety and security, as well as those that are incarcerated in our facilities. Addition to the department's correctional officer complement our central component of our plan, as these additional personnel are critical to allowing us to effectively deliver programming to best meet the needs of those incarcerated in our prisons. While the Senate's budget proposal provides funding for an additional 150 safety and security personnel, the proposal does not cover base personnel costs of existing operations. Despite the increase provided for these additional security personnel, the lack of funding for base personnel costs actually results in a net loss of more than 85 full-time equivalencies in fiscal year 20 and 120 full-time equivalencies in fiscal year 21. To put this in some context, the result of this would be in 2020 a reduction of more than 80 correctional officers in fiscal year 20.
Commissioner,
yes.
Could you kind of wrap it up a little bit?
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you.
Ultimately, Mr. Chair and committee members, the budget will impact the safety of the staff in our facilities. It will impact the safety of our communities in the long haul. And we look forward to working with you to try and find a solution forward. I would also just say this, that as we approach the legislative break next week, I would invite each of the members of the committee to join me in any one of Minnesota's prisons to see firsthand of the challenges faced daily by our staff and by the people that are incarcerated in those facilities. And again, I look forward to working with you to find a way forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Next up in the chair would be Mr. Vars, Mr. Hall.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members. For the record, my name is Max Hall, and I represent the 43,000 members of AFSCME Council 5. If you would grant me a little bit of leniency, we have one additional correctional officer who would like to provide brief comments after Mr. Vars, if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman. But I appreciate the time this afternoon to speak to the DE amendment to Senate File 802. We have several areas of concern and several areas in which we are grateful for inclusion, but I will start initially with the Guardian Ad Litem Board. We are concerned that many of the Guardian Ad Litem Board recommendations were not included in the committee's omnibus bill. We have the privilege of representing about 150 guardians ad litem, and I've had the opportunity to shadow many of them and to see them in court and witnessed firsthand how much they care about the children they are charged with protecting and making sure that they're advocating for the child's best interest. As highlighted in the Office of the Legislative Auditor's report on the Guardian ad litem program, due to critically low levels of staffing, hundreds of children were or are unassigned a guardian ad litem in the courtroom. And they made the recommendation of increasing staffing to handle this critical issue. The Guardian ad litem board and the governor recommended an increase of 46 FTEs to implement this recommendation, none of which are included in the committee's omnibus bill before you today. We are grateful for you including the increase in insurance costs for the program. However, we are greatly concerned that the other areas of the operations request remain unfunded in the bill before you, including the compensation line item. We are also concerned that the employee compensation line item, as the Commissioner Schnell highlighted, for the Department of Corrections was not included for staffing. As a result, you've heard from the Commissioner that this could result in layoffs, and at a time where we need increased members in our correctional facilities, this is the wrong way to go. So next is the Department of Corrections, and we are very grateful to you, Mr. Chairman, and Chair Limmer, for including additional correctional officers in the omnibus bill, specifically in the areas of security. In July of 2018, the murder of Officer Joseph Gum shook the Department of Corrections, our union, and our state to its core. The assault, and as well as the death of Officer Parisi, I want to note that as well. Out of these, one thing is clear. Our members demand funding for additional frontline correctional officers. On February 26th of this year, we had over 200 correctional officers members come to speak to members of this committee as well as the comparable committee in the House on this request, as well as our Day on the Hill on March 26th, where we had several thousand members come to talk to legislators about the critical need for safe staffing levels. The deaths of officers Joseph Gum and Parisi must never be forgotten or be in vain, and this increase in staffing will have a direct impact on the safety and security of our members and our state correctional facilities, all correctional facilities. When this bill goes into conference, we would encourage conference committee members to make CO funding a top priority. And to say the least, we are greatly disappointed with the budget target presented to this committee and the lack of funding for constitutionally mandated programs and staffing. But we appreciate the Chair Limmer's comments on that, but we look forward to working with Chair Limmer and members of this committee as we go forward. So I'd like to turn over to Officer Vars, and then if we could after him, Officer Magel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. And Mr. Vars, if you could come forward. Mr. Magel, if you could keep it short, come on up to the chair. Mr. Vars.
Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you, Senator Limmer, for all the hard work you've done on this. It says that we come short on dollar numbers. I don't know about dollar numbers. I know we need bodies. We need bodies for staffing so it's safe. We need bodies to get the inmates out so they can program. And when we go to work, we need to return home to work. On 7/18, we lost an officer. That officer had a shank impaled in his chest and beat with a hammer. We brought it up several times that we needed more bodies out there to be secure. We need the bodies. I hope that as you guys can work through, we've had many conversations with a lot of you. We will continue to have many conversations. Our members need to go home safe. Everyone does. And that includes inmates that are in there too, because these inmates are going to come back out in society and they need to be programmed properly. I'm just asking if you can look at it. We need the bodies so we can go home safe. That's bottom line. I don't know numbers, but I know safety, and that's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you. If you'd introduce
Mr.
yourself.
Chair and members, I thank you. My name's Sergeant Derek Magel. I worked together with my captain and administration in Oak Park Heights for the numbers we specifically needed at Oak Park. That was done statewide. The numbers that we had come up with and the numbers that we need, the officers that we need to run these facilities safely. Those discussions started with the boots on the ground, started with the posts, started with the positions and what we need for those posts to safely run the units and prisons that we have. Real quick, I wanted to just touch on a story that, I was a part of, or an incident at the time. On June 27th, we had a sergeant at Oak Park Heights. More days than not, we're short-staffed. That day in the morning, it was a routine day. I just happened to be walking down the hallway. Probably about 30 feet away, I hear the most horrific thing I've ever heard in my life. I enter into that unit, and there is a sergeant that I've seen for 13 years of my career, tied up with an inmate, and he has been slashed across the face, across the neck, resulting in 300 stitches. That was about as close I think I've ever seen to a death right there. Thankfully, myself and great men and women I work with were able to stop that. That sergeant has not returned to work. But like I say, that day I happened to be in the right place at the right time. A lot of days we don't have the staff there. So the numbers that we need and we're asking for are the foundation of this department and those facilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Ms. Callison and Ms. Bryce, if she would take the empty chair. Ms. Callison.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Jane Callison. I'm a member of the Hennepin County Board of Commissioners, and I'm speaking today on behalf of Hennepin County and the Association of Minnesota Counties, and I thank you for this opportunity to speak on Senate File 802. As others have said, we appreciate the hard work and thought that has gone into this bill and the communications between AMC, Hennepin County, and committee members. Thank you. Nevertheless, the Association of Minnesota Counties and Hennepin County are concerned about the lack of base subsidy funding for Community Corrections Act counties and county probation officers. The omnibus bill fails to provide appropriations for an operational increase or the increased cost of doing business. This includes higher costs for employer-paid health care contributions, salaries and compensation, rent and lease, fuel and utilities, IT, and other services. Minnesota's county-based probation systems provide more than 70% of the community supervision services in the state. County-based probation systems have been underfunded for nearly 2 decades. When the CPO and CCA subsidies do not increase to reflect rising operating budgets, Minnesota counties must increase their financial support for community supervision budgets. This negatively impacts county budgets and property taxpayers. This is especially true for our smaller counties, which are unable to make up the difference in cost. County-based probation systems provide critical services for meeting the needs of our criminal justice system. They have been in the forefront of criminal justice reform by providing evidence-based practices that focus on addressing criminogenic needs and reducing recidivism, goals that we know have bipartisan support. Increased funds are necessary to support basic functions, and we hope to work with legislators as this session continues to make sure an increase in operating costs is included for all county-based probation systems. Thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Commissioner. Ms. Bryce, if you'd be up here, and then at the empty chair, Ms. Kramer. Ms. Bryce, if you introduce yourself to the microphone for the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I appreciate you having me here today. My name is Lindsay Bryce. I'm the Law and Policy Director for the Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault. I've spoken to your committee a couple times now this year, so I'll keep this brief. I've worked with and for survivors of gender-based violence for over 20 years. The Minnesota Coalition Against Sexual Assault provides leadership and resources for sexual assault programs and allies to prevent sexual violence and promote a comprehensive socially just response for victims and survivors across the state. We appreciate and want to thank you for including the language around position of authority. That's a crucial piece of language that we've been working on for a number of years now. We thank you for adding law enforcement to the list of categories that I heard Senator Limmer speak of earlier today, and agreeing that sexual contact should not take place between law enforcement and folks in custody. We appreciate the repeal, the support of the repeal of the Voluntary Relationship Statute, and your support of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force. We do have concerns, like you've heard from pretty much everybody today, around funding. We have concerns that some of the items that I just mentioned continue to remain unfunded, but we are committed to working together to continue supporting victims and survivors statewide. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up in the empty seat will be Ms. Abderholden and Ms. Kramer.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I'm Katie Kramer, Policy Director with the Minnesota Coalition for Battered Women. Thank you for giving me the time to address committee today. We know that the Senate Judiciary was given a very small budget target, too small for the work that needs to be funded. We hope that in the coming weeks that additional money will be provided to the committee. Should additional dollars be allocated, one thing that is critically needed is an investment to transform violent behavior and prevent domestic violence. Over the past 30 years, 1,000 Minnesotans have been killed in domestic violence incidences, 6 in the first 3 months of this year. In more than half of those cases, the perpetrator had a documented prior history of violence. Those were points where we might have changed their behavior and prevented the homicide. The solution to domestic violence is not to lock away a perpetrator forever. It's not to release them into community without programming. The solution is to promote programming that has been shown to transform behavior, to prevent future violence, and to save the lives of domestic violence victims. We have programs in the state that work with perpetrators and show recidivism rates of less than 10%. But these programs are struggling to stay open. They cannot meet the demand. Minnesota has a long history of financially supporting domestic violence work, but the state has never provided funding for programming that works with perpetrators. Because of that, far too many perpetrators receive no programming, resulting in repeat offenses and a decrease in victim safety. There is great inconsistency in the programming and its availability. 40% of our counties in the state have no programming, and we did provide you all with a map of the state to show what type of programming is available in what counties for your reference. Even in counties with DV-specific programming, it is often one program for the full county or one class offered per year in the county. To prevent continuing violence, we need an investment into programming to transform domestic violence behaviors. We ask that you keep this need at the forefront as budget negotiations proceed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Kramer. Next up after Ms. Abderholden is Ms. Schmidt. Ms. Abderholden, good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, Sue Abderholden, Executive Director of NAMI, Minnesota. And I want to say that I wish I didn't actually have to be before this committee, but because we have not built our mental health system, too many people with untreated or undertreated mental illness end up in our criminal justice system. And while NAMI advocates in other committees to actually build our mental health system, we want to make sure that at least through this committee, there are efforts to divert people out of our criminal justice system and into treatment. And unfortunately, really partly due to the budget constraints, we're not really able to do that in this bill. We know that police training is really essential in terms of being the first person on the scene to divert someone into treatment versus into jail. And there is a loss of dollars for police training, and we really think that's frankly too bad because we've really seen it be effective. We also know that mental health courts are extremely effective, again, in getting people into treatment that they need to be well and safe in our community, and we're not obviously seeing that as well. We know that we're not seeing an increase in public defenders, and we know that people need effective counsel and that their caseloads are just too high. And so we're disappointed that that isn't happening either. We also were surprised to see that the bill did not fund the over 11% increase in psych evals. We have an increasing number of people who are undergoing Rule 20s. It's happening not just in Minnesota, but across the country. They have to be done, and I don't really know where the courts will come up with that additional $1 million. There is the task force language that is moving through the legislature on competency restoration, but obviously those recommendations won't even come back until next year. We do think that guardian ad litems need more training. Many of the people that they're interacting with, the adults, actually have a mental illness or a substance use disorder. And we were hoping to see some funding for intensive release for people who have a serious mental illness. After 3 years of working on the issue of reforming solitary confinement, we are really disappointed that that language isn't in here. And I know, Senator, you're not surprised to hear me say that. And this year, we actually had really good agreement. There was no opposition as the bill went through the House. We have strong support now from the Department of Corrections. We really thought the time to undertake this and deal with it was now. And we do know that in the Department of Corrections, we have so many people in our prisons who have very serious mental illnesses. They need the increased staffing in order to provide mental health treatment. I know that you had very tough decisions before you, but the target was really too small to address these very pressing needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schmidt.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, my name is Lorna Schmidt. I'm the Government Relations Director for the American Heart Association. As many others have said, we know that this committee was given a difficult target and forced to make many hard decisions as this bill was assembled. Telephone CPR was unfortunately one of the proposals that was not included, so I wanted to take this time to reiterate the strong support that exists for the initiative and express our hope that we can continue to work with you as session continues to explore opportunities to move this proposal forward this year. Cardiac arrest is a medical emergency. Without quick action through CPR and defibrillation, death is almost certain. This makes the actions of bystanders critical, especially when you consider that EMS response times can exceed 10 minutes in many parts of the state. With telephone CPR, we could ensure that all 911 operators are able to provide callers with CPR coaching over the phone or quickly connect them to someone who can. This train or transfer option has received strong support from EMS partners in Minnesota, including secondary answering points, who have recently committed to working with primary PSAPs to have cardiac arrest calls transferred to their agencies at no cost. Our goal is to save lives, and we know that bystander CPR can triple a cardiac arrest victim's chance of survival. Telephone CPR would strengthen our EMS system and ensure that all 911 operators are equipped with the skill to offer callers this life-saving instruction. As negotiations continue, we hope that you will keep telephone CPR in mind. We are happy to be a resource and available any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Schmidt. Senator Limmer, we would like to move now the adoption of the A02 Senate file.
Mr. Chair, I would move the A2 amendment as amended.
Okay. Members, Senator Limmer moves the Senate file A02 to adopt the delete all amendment as the 802. All in favor?
Well, Mr. Chair?
Yes. Senator.
Did we or did we not pass the A4 amendment that amended the A2 amendment?
We did.
So we're considering the A2 amendment as amended.
Yes, and then we'll take up other amendments. And yeah, and open up for discussion. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Okay, we have the bill before us. Members, any discussion? Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Commissioner Schnell, if he could return to the testifier table.
Commissioner Schnell. Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, we've heard some numbers regarding correctional officer staffing levels, and there's been some concern expressed in the past that there are a number of vacancies and difficulty in filling them. The numbers I've heard are 80 or 90 vacancies. Can you tell me, are those numbers accurate, and what's the status now of the ability to fill existing vacancies?
Commissioner Schnell.
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, we have made some significant progress relative to this. We have just completed a complete department-wide analysis of officer positions, and that roughly right now we're at about 40 clear vacancies. And when I say clear vacancies, we do have a number of people that are on military leave, family leave, those sorts of things where they are The positions are spoken for. They are allotted or assigned to someone, but there are these 40 openings, and that also includes the fact that right now we have approximately 30 individuals in our academy as we speak. They just started late last week. And over the past several months, we have done some changes in terms of the way we are going to do recruitment. In fact, next week, we will be doing the first of what we believe will ultimately be many recruitment events at the correctional facility in Faribault. And what will happen is candidates will be able to attend that, an information session, make application, be interviewed, and have the background process initiated. And we'd be in a position to offer or extend offers of employment within a matter of days versus weeks or months, which has been the case in the past. We believe that the combination of these efforts will make a big difference in terms of our ability to not just fill the existing vacancies, but assist us as we move forward.
So, Mr. Commissioner, if you were to get funding to fill, 200 positions, or how many do you think you'd be able to fill looking forward over the next 2 years?
Commissioner Schnell.
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, we believe that we could fill our existing vacancies, which, as I said, today is about 40. And we believe that we do have the capability to fill as many as 120. That was our initial plan, was to fill 120 additional spots plus our vacancies over the next 2 years.
Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, but under the budget that's proposed, you would not only get enough money, you wouldn't get enough money to fill your requested slots, but you'd end up having a cut budget, essentially, right?
Commissioner Schnell.
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, you're absolutely right. Not only would we see a reduction in over the next biennium of about 125 FTEs, funding in general, but if we had to make up the cost of the offender health care contract, that would further dig into the staffing at the DOC department-wide.
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioner, that healthcare contract is constitutionally mandated, isn't it? In fact, there was just a recent decision, as I recall, on that.
Mr. Chair, Senator Latz, that is correct. We are required by the Supreme Court decision, thus the Constitution, to provide that health care to offenders.
Thank you.
Any other questions, members? Senator Ingebretson.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I don't know if you've talked about the ratios, prisoners per officer. I know those regulations come down to local sheriffs from the Department of Corrections. Where do you stand with that?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I think we have been working with the union in terms of looking at ratios. This is one of those difficult issues. We certainly want to make sure our staff are safe and secure when they're doing kind of key or important, transfers or movements of offenders from one unit to another. At the same time, as you know from the policing world, in the 70s when every police car had 2 officers in it, ultimately there was a decision to move away from that so that we could spread security personnel more broadly and make them available where we might need them more quickly. And these are some of the discussions that we feel we are having at present, and ultimately working together. We are identifying, how that's going to ultimately work. But we know that in order to kind of staff the range of positions and posts, and as you know, nothing happens inside these secure facilities without staff to move people to these different units and different program activities.
So follow up.
Senator Ingebretson.
So, Commissioner, do you have a national standard at all that you staff according to, or I'm just thinking off the top of my head, 60 prisoners, anything over 60 at the county level, you needed another 24-hour person, another jailer. Do you have any of those national standards that you take your guidance by, and where do you stand with that?
Commissioner Snow.
Mr. Chair, Senator, we staff per post at 1.8 FTEs per post. So the way it works in the prisons is that we identify posts for various different activities or things that would happen. For instance, a housing unit may have 5 posts. And then our staffing complement is built on a 1.8 officer per post to address vacancies, sick calls, vacation, all those range of activities. And that is how we staff in the prison based upon on our population and the needs of within the facility.
Senator Ingrid.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I'm not getting to that number. 1.8 staff per how many prisoners then average?
Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, there is not a direct correlation right now in terms of the number of inmates that we staff. It's really more about the number of posts that would be in a given area. So in some housing units, there may be a minimum of five officers. There could be 200 plus inmates in that housing block.
Any other questions, members? Senator Latz.
I have a question for Mr. Turner. In his description of the budget with regard to the guards, as I recall, he indicated that the governor's proposal was for 120 guards. What was the number nominally anyway in the chairman's proposal for guards?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Latz. If you just, divide the number by 72,000, which is the annual cost for a guard, according to the department, it's 38 COs in fiscal year 20, 66 in 21.
Senator Latz.
So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Turner, based on the testimony we've heard, those 38 COs, are they in addition to filling the existing vacancies, or would they be, if there are vacancies of 40, would that be just enough to fill the existing vacancies?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Latz, it's my understanding that this would be in addition to the vacancies, which are already funded, I would imagine, and these are additional guards.
Okay. So, Mr. Chairman,
Senator Latz.
So we're looking at this budget funding maybe 1/3 of the level that the department has determined they need in order to provide a safe environment for the correctional officers and the offenders. Is that what I'm understanding?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
Senator
Turner.
Latz. Yeah, 1/3 in fiscal year 20, but then the way the bill is put together right now, in fiscal year 20, $2 million is set aside, if you read the text of the bill, for security upgrades, technological upgrades and infrastructure. The second year is all personnel, so it would be 66, the equivalent of 66 COs. And then if you go into the tails, where it jumps up to 11.2 million, I mean, that comes out to 155 FTEs on just the straight division.
So, Mr. Chairman, at best, we'd be waiting a couple of years until you get into the next biennium before they come anywhere close to what the department has determined is necessary for a safe environment. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer the A15 amendment.
Okay. Senator Latz offers the A15 amendment. Senator Latz, you want to talk to us about the A15?
Mr. Chairman, the A15 amendment would provide the governor's funding level for correctional officers and other safety-related enhancements, 120 correctional officers, 6 additional correctional officer lieutenants, 41 additional non-correctional staff, and infrastructure and technological upgrades to enhance facility security and safety. Mr. Chairman, we can't afford to wait. And our correctional officers can't afford to wait. Every day they go to work, their lives are at risk, and this budget doesn't help them at all. In fact, it probably makes it worse because you've got unfunded but constitutionally mandated expenditures that are also going to have to be taken out of the department's budget. So they're going to have to move something else around. So quite literally, I think this budget that's proposed puts lives at risk. I don't want to be here next year or in 2 years saying we got 2 more correctional officers are dead because we didn't provide the funding this year to have adequate staffing and other upgrades to protect them, or offenders dead, for that matter. So, Mr. Chairman, I ask the committee here to adopt the A15 amendment to provide for the level of funding that the department has determined is necessary to provide that safety. And I ask for a roll call vote and that it be recorded in the journal.
It's been asked for a roll call and recorded in the journal. Need 3 hands. 3 hands are seen and will be recorded in the journal. Senator Limmer, you want to speak to the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Latz, I understand the need for correction officers. With the limitations in our target, we tried to address that as best as we could over time, rather than in such an immediate fashion that you are now presenting. We still have our target that we have. I don't believe by your amendment that you're moving any funding around from the existing target total, so that would exceed the target value that we've been given. And for that reason, I would oppose your amendment at this time. Sympathetic to the amendment and what you're trying to do. And like I said before, I'm certainly going to work as well as I can to get added funding, especially in this area, prior to the end of this session.
Any more discussion, members? Senator Ingebretson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Latz, to your amendment, when you talk about 41 additional non-correctional staff, can you or maybe a testifier tell me what that is?
No.
Senator Latz.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask either Mr. Turner or Commissioner Schnell to provide the details on that. That was part of the governor's budget.
Commissioner Schnell, if you'd like to come up. Commissioner Schnell.
Mr. Chair, Senator, the additional positions included a range of positions that included behavioral health therapists, so mental health personnel, and this was really heavily associated with the item that Ms. Aberholden was talking about from a mental health standpoint, the restrictive housing policy that she was referencing. So there was additional staff there. There was also some additional personnel in the food service area, which has been profoundly understaffed and creates challenges because right now we're moving regular officers into the food service area to provide adequate levels of safety and security there. And then finally, there are, I believe, 6 or 7 FTEs that are related to just infrastructure of people, electricians, plumbers. One of the things, as most all of you know, our facilities are aging, and just the need to kind of do upkeep and have people to provide maintenance of like our plumbing systems, water systems, pipes, and so forth has become a growing need. And so there's I think 6 or 7 FTEs related to that.
Senator
Ingebretson. And thank you. One more follow-up, Commissioner. If you were given the 120 additional correction officers today, how long would it take you to hire those 120 plus the 80 you're short?
Commissioner Schnell.
Mr. Chair, we believe right now we're about 40 short today, and so the additional 120, so we would be looking at a total of 160. We do believe that we would be able to make that hiring target within the next biennium, so within 2 years. And we say that based upon the changes we've made and even some of the progress we have had in hiring to date over the last couple of months.
Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question actually is for Mr. Turner. Just wondering, I'm still relatively new to this process, and I imagine we're going to be seeing some more of these types of amendments coming up that may throw our target out of balance. What is a typical procedure for a bill that if it does come out of this committee on balance, does the finance chair typically hear those bills? What is the typical procedure for something like that?
Mr. Turner.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Johnson. I don't know. We've never sent one to finance that exceeded its target. But you pass the bill to finance, I guess they would have to hear it. It would probably come in with an amendment which would restore it to target.
Senator Johnson, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the finance chair would have the ability to modify our budget out of our priorities then, if that did happen. So, yeah, I just want some clarity. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Johnson. I think what it would do is, though, it would send a statement and a position to the Finance Committee that this committee does not agree with that budget target, does not think it's adequate, that we don't feel that we can do our job adequately, which is dealing with all of these judiciary and public safety issues with such a limited target. So we could show some solidarity here in our committee and pass forward a bill that we think does the job.
Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner Schnell, you mentioned that you had 40 vacancies right now.
Commissioner Schnell.
Mr. Chair, Senator, yes. At the present time, we have 40 vacancies.
And Mr. Chair, Commissioner, how long has that been in place of 40 that you've not had available?
Senator Schnell.
Mr. Chair, Senator, we've had as high as 90. I think in early January, we have made some significant progress on hiring, and then these changes in our hiring process, which we believe will ultimately expedite the process and allow us to bring people in more quickly, will help that going forward. But that has been there has been an issue.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Senator Limmer.
On this point, we knew that even last year there were vacancies in the correction staff. And despite the best efforts of the correction department, many of them remained unfilled. And I don't recall when those vacancies first started or when those positions were made available by the legislative process. But I do know that it's taken a very long time. And it does trigger other points of concern that I would like to study during the interim. And that's the entire compensation package for, let's say, a beginning correction officer that's employed by the state of Minnesota. I have been told that, and I've been told by state correction staff, that their pay scale is somewhat lower than county correction officer staff, especially those that are located in the Twin Cities area. That might be part of the reason why the Department of Corrections has difficulty in fielding adequate, qualified staff and employees for correction officer positions. And I think that's something that we should research. I know in previous years, this type of budget process has put a little bit more money toward law enforcement and not in the same proportion to correctional officers. And so that is something that this committee should review and study, and that's what I intend for our committee to study this coming interim.
Any more questions, members? Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, that's all very well and good, but it doesn't say anything about whether we should adopt this amendment. The commissioner has testified that he thinks he can fill these empty positions and increase the complement by the end of the biennium, presumably at the current compensation structure. And some of the changes I think that have been made to the hiring process include allowing interviewing to be done at each local prison facility instead of having the interviews all come into a central place, allowing background checks to be done more locally, expediting that process, making hiring decisions at the local level so that those decisions can be made rather than having it run through the central office. Just those kind of changes alone can expedite the process, and they're making additional efforts to recruit people from areas more local to the prison facilities as well. You know, if the commissioner thinks they can fill these positions, and if they've been able to fill these positions since he became the commissioner in January, if they've cut the vacancy rate down by more than half, I think we've got an obligation to give him the funding to be able to fill the positions that he thinks he needs. And I agree completely with Senator Pappas. This is an opportunity for us as a committee to tell the full Finance Committee, it wouldn't be just the chair who could make any changes, the full Finance Committee would have to make additional changes, that we don't feel we can do our job in good conscience without this level of funding in our budget for correctional officers.
Senator Rolfe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I'm doing the math correctly, Mr. Turner, over the biennium we would be adding, you said 66 and 38, that's 104 positions. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair and Senator Rolfe, no, it's not cumulative. It'd be 38 and then 66, including the...
In total.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Limmer.
Could I ask Mr. Turner a question, and that is, what would be the dollar value of Senator Latz's A15 amendment compared to the $25 million limitation that we've been given?
Mr. Turner.
Mr. Chairman and members, what the amendment does is it replaces Senator Limmer's recommendation for prison security and safety on line 212 of the spreadsheet, which is $9.5 million, with the governor's request, which is $36.5 million. It would increase the budget by $27 million over target. So it goes from a $25 million budget to a $52 million budget.
Senator Limmer's, Senator Latz moves the A15. A roll call has been requested. We'll take the roll.
Senator Limmer?
No.
Senator Anderson?
No.
Senator Dietzig? Yes. Senator Hall?
No.
Senator Ingebrigtsen?
No.
Senator Johnson?
No.
Senator Latz?
Yes.
Senator Pappas?
Yes.
Senator Rel?
No. With 3 yeses and 6 noes, the motion does not pass. Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, I have the A8 amendment.
Senator Pappas moves the A8 amendment. If we could have that passed out.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What the A8 amendment would do is it would fund the task force on murdered and missing Indigenous women. We had a very moving hearing on this last week. I was very happy that you heard this bill, Senator Limmer. It's a terrible situation and really tragic for all the family members who don't know what's happened to some of their daughters or their sisters or their mothers. And we even had that very intimate personal story from the young woman who had herself been raped and witnessed her mother being murdered. I'm sure we all, our hearts were just broken at listening to those stories. So I was really surprised that it wasn't included. It's a very small amount of money. It was included in your bill, I think, last year, the one that was vetoed by the governor. I think it's been very popular in the other body. I'm sure it'd be very popular here if it was a standalone bill. And so I would ask members to please support the A8 amendment.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Pappas, I too have a fondness for this particular bill that's now represented in the A8 amendment. Again, going back to the limitations we have on the budget target, I focused on the immediate safety issues that are current in our correction system, as well as the health care requirements for our employees. This is an area and an issue of tremendous importance. I believe it will survive the conference committee process as we move forward, and it will be included. However, with the limitations I have to put my focus on the immediate need for safety. This particular bill is a task force which will review and study the incidences of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And in light of a task force versus the immediate safety concerns in the Department of Corrections, I had to make a choice on moving in that direction. Now, if you would like to take $150,000 out of the health care budget of the employees, or $150,000 out of the security of our Department of Corrections for this task force, I would entertain that. I'm not sure if everyone's going to support that, but that's the line that I had to satisfy.
Senator Limmer, I want to make sure that we have the A8 before us. Another one had been passed out. Does anybody not have the A8 amendment? Okay, Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I love all my children, so I don't want to steal from Peter to pay Paul. But, Mr. Chairman, there's always a little bit of money left on the bottom line. What would you think about, just as a placeholder, if we just set aside, say, $25,000? And then the language could move forward with that.
Well,
Senator Limmer.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Pappas, I've got to keep it under $25 million. And if I exceed that, then we are going to be out of proportion with the Finance Committee as we move forward. They may accept that. They may not accept it. There's a lot of gut-wrenching issues that we will have in this budget, and some of them are not going to be addressed today. But they will be addressed as we move forward, because this type of budget has nowhere to go but up. And so I think we can satisfy this particular project in time this year, but I would prefer keeping the budget according to the instructions I've been given.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that reassurance, then I'll withdraw the A8 amendment.
Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chair, Senator Pappas, I'm also a co-author of this bill as well.
Senator Pappas withdraws the A8 amendment. Members? Senator Dietzig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We heard earlier about the shortfall in the Department of Corrections budget. We also heard, and I know Senator Limmer mentioned that he wasn't thrilled with the target, and I know a lot of you have concerns too. The Board of Public Defense is also The funding request is under their funding. The Board of Public Defense provides mandated services. They can't turn down cases. Not yet. Senator Pappas is getting ahead of me. They keep our legal. Oh, sorry. Okay, then I offer the A11 amendment, and I'll keep
Senator
talking.
Dietzig offers the A11 amendment, if we could have that passed out.
Yep. I'll keep, Mr. Chair, should I just keep talking while they're passing it out?
Why don't you go ahead and keep talking?
Okay. So the Board of Public Defense and the public defenders, they keep our legal system moving. If their caseload gets too big, it could slow down the process. This amendment doesn't address compensation, which they also have compensation issues, like the chair mentioned and Department of Corrections mentioned with their correction officers. This addresses their caseload growth and staffing. And so the amendment provides funding at the governor's request, at his revised request, for the public defender's caseload growth and staffing. They've seen a 50% increase in child protection cases recently. Their current staffing is at about 68.5% of the state national average and standards. This amendment will drop that to 63% in 2021, but if we don't increase staffing, it will be at 70%. I believe they've already had 8 resignations in 2019. This is a maintenance and stability request. It is not a bells and whistles request.
Senator Dietzig, you have something to add?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would like a roll call recorded in the journal as well.
Senator Dietzig has requested roll call and be put in the journal, but I need 3 hands. Seeing 3 hands, it will be reported in the journal. Senator Limmer, would you like to speak to the amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to let everyone in on a little inside information. We've had lots of discussion. I've had lots of discussion behind the scenes and out of public rooms about the desire and need for this budget to recognize constitutional mandate. And this particular request that is represented in the A11 amendment certainly is a constitutional mandate. I'm having difficulty in getting certain people to represent or recognize constitutional mandate. And so I'm in a position of being torn a little bit between following the limitation that's been given, and that starts the debate. It starts the negotiation with a much higher budget that is in the other body. And so this would raise this budget from $25 million by roughly another $12.8 million if Mr. Turner's figure is correct. And for this time in the time, or for this moment in the timeline before us, I'm going to oppose your amendment, but I certainly recognize the need for constitutional mandate to be fulfilled. And that's just the position that I'm in right now.
Any questions, members? Hearing none, a roll call has been requested. Staff will take the roll.
Senator Limmer?
No.
Senator Anderson?
No.
Senator Dietzig?
Yes.
Senator Hall?
No.
Senator Ingebrigtsen?
No.
Senator Johnson?
No.
Senator Latz?
Yes.
Senator Pappas?
Yes.
Senator Rell?
No.
Members, with 3 yeses and 6 noes, the amendment does not pass. Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, I have the A12 amendment.
Senator Latz moves the A12 amendment. Senator Latz, if you'd speak to your A12 amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The A12 amendment would fulfill the governor's request to open new Department of Human Rights offices in Bemidji, Duluth, Rochester, and Worthington. Mr. Chairman, the Department of Human Rights opened an office in St. Cloud a few years ago, and they have seen their walk-in traffic there in terms of complaints about local claims of discrimination double. There's a demand out there because there are incidents of discrimination in the workplace, in housing, and public accommodations that exist out there, and if they're happening, and we know they are, it coarsens society, it costs people their jobs, it ferments conflict based on race, national origin, color, religion, disability, sexual orientation, and so on. The department right now has its primary office in St. Paul and only one satellite office. So it is much more challenging for victims of discrimination or those who believe that they are victims of discrimination in other parts of the state to seek a remedy through our state agency. It's also that much more challenging for businesses to learn about and to be able to comply with our state human rights laws, because the department provides a very important role in training and educating businesses. And that is also not as robust as it could be if there were satellite offices in greater Minnesota. The governor has actually the St. Cloud office was pushed by then Chairman Representative Knobloch because he recognized the importance of having that kind of a facility in his community. I suspect every member on this committee would agree about that importance. But there is no substitute for having a physical presence. I suspect even Senator Chamberlain would agree with that. There is no substitute for having a physical presence in the community where people feel they have access to the state services. So the A12 amendment would provide those services to Minnesotans in other parts of the state. I ask this committee's support and ask for a roll call vote recorded in the journal.
Senator Latz has asked for a roll call and to record in the journal. We need 3 hands. Seeing 3 hands, that'll happen. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would imagine there's a number of government agencies that would request satellite offices around the state of Minnesota. It doesn't necessarily mean they should get those. I think primarily of the Department of Commerce that represents licensed professionals. And yet they do not have, and there certainly are complaints about those who have professional licenses. And yet the Commerce Department is not requesting satellite offices around the state. So as I look at this, I'm trying to determine, and I'm not necessarily opposed to the whole concept, but I haven't really been convinced either that a government agency needs to have satellite offices. In an age of computer records and transfer of information simultaneously, I would think that the department in St. Paul could adequately satisfy the demand of complaints that are generated to the Department of Human Rights. I simply have not been convinced that it's a need that needs to be immediately fulfilled. Perhaps I could be convinced of that, but right now I have not been. Also, it's a relatively small cost, $3.3 million, and then an ongoing 3.4 tail. But at this time, I would oppose the amendment.
Okay. Any other discussion, members? Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, I don't know off the top of my head if the Department of Commerce already has offices in other parts of the state. But most of the people they deal with are licensed professionals because of the regulatory role that they play. Licensed professionals are perhaps more accustomed to dealing with remote agencies just as a part of their job. On the other hand, the Department of Motor Vehicles and the Department of Driver's License, the DVS, Driver and Vehicle Services, they have deputy registrars all over the state where people can get their license plates. They can renew their driver's licenses. They can transfer title to their vehicle. Theoretically, yeah, they could all send their stuff electronically to a central location in St. Paul, and they can wait as long as they're going to wait to get it back. Or they can go to the pretty extensive network of deputy registrars and existing examiner stations where they can take their driver's exams and take the road tests all over the state. In fact, I think there are 4 or 5 of those exam stations in the metro area alone. So when you're talking about direct retail services to people who are not accustomed in their everyday life to dealing with remote regulatory agencies, it's that much more important to have a physical presence. You know, if you look out at a shopping mall and you can tell where the high traffic patterns are going, and sometimes stores change their locations in shopping malls, and I can think of one example right now in the Galleria where the Scheherazade jewelry store was in a high traffic corner, and they moved to a less high traffic location. And their business, if I remember the news story correct, dropped by about 50%. There is a real value to having a presence, a physical presence in a location that's convenient for people where they live. And ultimately, the state exists to serve the people that we represent. This here, and we have proof from the St. Cloud office that it's been successful and valuable and important. So this amendment would open up to far more people the potential remedies, and to businesses the ability to learn how not to violate our human rights laws in Minnesota. I encourage your support.
Senator Limmer.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe the office in the Department of Human Rights in St. Paul, just that location alone, that does not deny anyone their opportunity for investigation if they feel wronged. I think that's vitally important to understand. And in comparison to driver license bureaus across the state, that nearly every one of the 5.5 million people in the state of Minnesota require some type of update on their ID card or a driver license, or getting a car license transferred of the 1 million plus car ownership tags that have to be required every year. The scale of that type of government service far outweighs the very few in proportion to 5.5 million people of the complaints that would come to the Department of Human Rights. So I think the comparison of having that many recognizing these bureaus for licensure just doesn't fit the scale that we're talking about.
Senator Latz moves the A12 amendment. A roll call will be taken.
Senator Limmer?
No.
Senator Anderson?
No.
Senator Dietzig? Yes. Senator Hall?
No.
Senator Ingebrigtsen? No. Senator Johnson?
No.
Senator Latz?
Yes.
Senator Pappas? Yes. Senator Relk?
No. Members, with 3 yeses and 6 noes, the motion does not pass. Senator Dietzig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I offer the A10 amendment.
Senator Dietzig offers the A10 amendment.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to
Dietzig.
start talking? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
So I am optimistic on this one. I'm going to hold out hope. This amendment provides additional funding for youth intervention programs. Senator Ingebrigtsen had a bill that we heard sometime within the last 2 weeks. I believe Senator Latz, Senator Johnson, and Senator Bruce Anderson are also co-authors on the bill. That bill requested $9 million each year for youth intervention programs, and the amendment scaled it back, understanding that we have a tight budget, and so only asked for $1 million each year. Youth intervention programs, they actually work. This is from the handouts that were handed out when Senator Ingebrigtsen had the bill. They actually have a return on investment. So for every $9.78, so they save $9.78 for every state tax dollar that is invested. They provide services for youth to help them improve their life skills, develop pro-social attitudes, and 90% of the people that have done these programs do not get new delinquency charges. The bill, as Senator Ingebrigtsen introduced, was supported by the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, Chief of Police Association, or I should say they support those services, and youth intervention programs. County Attorneys Association, all support youth intervention programs. So with that is my amendment.
It's a good program. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can't argue with the effectiveness of the youth intervention program. The reason why we created the budget that we did was based on the limitations, and that the focus was going to be on correction officer security and protection. This does not go in that direction, and in comparison to the safety of our correction officers, I moved in the direction of correction officers. This certainly would be worth about $2 million in our budget, and for that reason I'll oppose the bill, or the amendment.
Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is really a problem with the legislature being kind of short-sighted. When we think about down the road, the impact on corrections and the corrections budget, if we don't go upstream and intervene with youth that we think are at risk of potentially joining our correctional system, then we're just going to have more and more expenses and more people in prison. So, you know, things like this, prevention programs like this are vitally important. And so I really hope the members vote for it.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as Senator Limmer just said, as well as Senator Pappas and the author here, this is a good investment. I mean, it always has been. What we want to try to do is eliminate the need for more corrections. I think that's kind of the area we should be looking at moving forward. That's why I've always sponsored this bill and carried it. However, I'm going to have to agree with the chairman in that when you get down to a target like he has, you have to prioritize, and officer safety seems to be the obvious area that we have to address first and foremost, at least at this point. So, but I do not disagree. I think investment in kids is always a good investment, and trying to turn that cycle around so we don't have to have. We've all heard it. We've all heard the studies, so we know that it's good stuff. So, but I would go with the chairman.
Senator Dietzig moves the A10 amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
And the noes have it. Senator Pappas.
Mr. Chairman, I have the A5 amendment.
Senator Pappas moves the A5 amendment. The amendment could be passed out.
Mr. Chairman, interest of time, as it's being passed out, this would provide the guardian ad litem's positions to fulfill the federal mandates. We've heard the testimony. We're talking about vulnerable children that by federal law, if we want to accept the federal money, are supposed to be assigned an advocate. We have 500 children who have not been assigned an advocate. We have asked the legislative auditor to audit this program, and they come back with their recommendations, and then we don't implement them. So what's the point? I mean, we ask people to protect our children, and then we don't give them the resources to do that. So this, I feel very strongly that this is a very, very important issue, that these children be represented in the judicial process so that they have a voice. And their interests may not be the same interests as their parents or their guardians or whatever. And this is a very important and unique program so that children have a voice in the judicial system. So, Mr. Chairman, I would like a roll call on this vote with it recorded in the journal, because I want people to think very carefully about the importance of funding this very vital program.
Senator Pappas has requested a roll call and that it be recorded in the journal. I need 3 hands. Seeing 3 hands, it'll be recorded. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just like the discussion we had regarding the previous amendment regarding public defenders and how they are federal and state mandates, this too is in that category. And I agree with Senator Pappas in that definition. Guardian ad litems is critical to the need of children being represented in the courtroom. However, again, we're beginning the negotiations on a state budget, and this would push us over that target by close to $9 million. This is an area that will be discussed through the negotiation process, just like public defenders will be. And I intend on making sure that there's some extra funds for to get closer to the needs of the public defenders in this state. But at this time, I can't support it at this juncture right now.
Any questions, members? Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I agree, too, that these kids should have the services that they need. And, you know, they would get the services that they need. I think Senator Limmer would agree, and probably everybody here would agree, if when we're talking about children, all the fraud that's been going on in the CCAP in our state, just minor parts of the amount of fraud that's been going on there that the state of Minnesota has apparently allowed to go on for quite some years. We wouldn't be arguing about this kind of funding that's really needed. That kind of theft going on in our state government is unconscionable, and these are the types of programs, unfortunately, that suffer over blatant fraud right out in front of all of us. So I do agree that this should be funded. If there's any dollars to be found, and again, talking about kids, pretty hard to vote against that.
Senator Pappas.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, Senator Ingebrigtsen, CCAP isn't even funded in our budget. So it's not like if, you know, weren't spending the money there, we could spend it here. It's in a totally different budget. And as I recall, the auditor's report really indicated there was a lot less fraud than was originally reported. Obviously, we want zero fraud, and those people should be and are being prosecuted. But I think that, you know, I think we can't blame the entire child care system, because there's certainly people out there who are providing really important care and getting very low reimbursement for that care.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Mr. Chair, I don't want to argue back and forth. I'm just making a point that there are a lot of people out there doing it right, but there turned out to be a real big bunch that were doing it wrong. And now, yes, all of our budgets are suffering. That has nothing to do with this budget. I'm just making the point.
Senator Pappas moves the A5 amendment, and a roll call was requested.
Senator Limmer?
No.
Senator Anderson?
No.
Senator Dietzig? Yes. Senator Hall?
No.
Senator Ingebrigtsen?
No.
Senator Johnson?
No.
Senator Latz?
Yes.
Senator Pappas?
Yes.
Senator Rell?
No. Members with 3 yeses and 6 noes, the motion does not pass.
Mr. Chair?
Senator Limmer.
I just want to take a moment to digress for just a moment. As you know, these last 2 amendments involved our state relationship with children and how to protect them in a court setting. And the other is to steer them away from a potential life of crime. One observation, and I make mention of this all the time with people that come to my office, especially in the criminal justice field. And I think we as a state kind of miss one major direction. And I learned this many years ago when I was a correction officer. Matter of fact, I made this presentation, or I talked about this with 2 groups that visited my office just this morning. I seem to do it every day. As a correction officer, you walk the cell blocks, and oftentimes the cell blocks are quiet, and you can get to know a few of the people that are residing in their cells at the time while there's other activities going on in a prison. And you get to know some of these guys, and especially at a county workhouse, it's a little more local, it's Hennepin County. But you get to know the guys, and you ask them questions like, well, what neighborhood were you raised in? And you get to talk to them. It's not just turning a key all the time. You actually live and breathe with these guys. And the one thing I've learned, and my interest has always been in criminology, the one thing I've learned is that I would say an informal poll, I would say close to 90% of those people that are inmates or have some experience behind bars come from an abusive or a broken home. And where do we put all of our resources? We wait all the way down the line until they get close to adulthood, and then they do something really stupid, and then we spend millions and millions and millions of dollars reacting to that lifestyle. But where do we spend the money on helping the single mom or the family that really wants to stay together, but they just can't learn how to live with each other and raise kids in a responsible way? And even though I've been trying to point this out for many, many years in private discussions, these 2 amendments have kind of triggered me to say it out loud, because I think there's a new direction that in the future we can start looking at, and that's to get to households and families that really need the help on how to just cope with life and how to cope with kids, and kids that might be unruly, and how do you discipline kids without beating them up. And that's a new direction that I think we should do. I just wanted to take this opportunity to digress a little bit, because we keep spending money on corrections and guardian ad litems and all sorts of things, and that's needed now. But we need to have another new direction to put a focus on where our resources are, so we can avoid the very, very, very high cost in the future of corrections and other institutional cures that don't really seem to work. Let's go on to the next amendment, Mr. Chair.
Okay, members, anything else? Senator Dietzig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the A6.
Senator Dietzig moves the A6 amendment.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to discuss it while you're passing it out?
If you wouldn't mind. Senator Dietzig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Limmer, as you were talking about the need of how do we help some of these families that are really trying to either stay together or to just stabilize their lives so that they can be productive, I was thinking of my next amendment. So I have an amendment to provide the governor's revised recommendations for civil legal services. And so it's not the mandated services that guardian ad litem and the public defenders have, but it does help stabilize family. It provides the civil services to the poorest of the poor. They have offices throughout the state, including Alexandria and St. Cloud. They help families break the cycle of domestic violence and create safer homes for families. They help prevent homelessness by stabilizing those families. They help our most vulnerable, including seniors and disabilities. For every dollar invested, their rate of return is $3.94 in economic benefits to the community. Civil Legal Services gets a large percent of its money from private foundations, but they are able to use every dollar that the state gets and leverage that to get more funding. So every little bit helps. They turn away about 60% of the eligible clients that seek help in their office. This funding will help a compensation enhancement for the attorneys. They are some of the lowest paid, the lowest of the low. And so this will just help stabilize those offices. They lose a lot of their staff. They get trained there, and then they go on to, like I think Mr. Schaefer said earlier, to the public defender's office and make a little bit more. So that is the description of this amendment. It is about $4.2 million over the biennium. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I knew someone was going to follow up on my comment.
I listened to you.
And Senator Dietzig, this I would agree is a noble cause. It pushes us over our target by 3.8 mil. And at least for this time, I have to oppose your amendment.
Senator Dietzig moves the A6 amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. The noes have it. The amendment does not pass. Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, I have the A14 amendment, please.
Senator Latz moves the A14 amendment.
Would you like me to start describing it, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
Mr.
Senator
Chairman,
Latz.
The A14 amendment funds the judiciary, judges, and staff at the governor's original request of 3.5% increase in their compensation. The chair's budget is essentially a cut in compensation in real terms because it's got 0% increase in both years of the biennium for our judges and for the staff that run the judicial system. The chairman has been very diligent over many years in advocating for judiciary funding on the grounds not only that the entire system is constitutionally required, but it is a constitutionally independent third branch of government, and we have an obligation to fund them. I don't think that it's fair in this budget to ask our judicial staff to continue to serve for, in real terms, a reduction in pay. And actually that argument can be made throughout this budget where the chairman is funding all of the agency staff at 0 and 0 except for a health insurance increase, which they won't see in their pockets at all. But in the judiciary, we got the judges and the staff, the clerks in the courtroom, the ones who process the cases, the ones who enter all the data into the criminal justice system, electronic databases, the ones that our police officers and sheriffs and law enforcement and public defenders and prosecutors rely upon to get information on past criminal history and to make decisions about charging, and the ones that defense lawyers turn to for information on how to best represent their clients who are faced with the power of the state in charging them with criminal offenses and potentially putting them into jail for many, many years. If that system doesn't work, the entire foundation of our criminal justice system and in the judiciary, our civil justice system falls down. As all of the civil attorneys and parties, businesses and individuals throughout the state rely upon our justice system for recompense. You know, it used to be before there was a robust civil justice system that disputes over money and otherwise were fought out in duels, in backyard brawls, and far worse ways of resolving differences. We have a civil system now that needs to be able to function. So I ask the members to support this request at a 3.5% increase, which I think is only fair. And I ask for a roll call, and that'll be recorded in the journal.
Request for roll call and recorded in the journal has been requested. I need 3 hands. 3 hands are seen. It'll be recorded. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I agree with the concept that where Senator Latz is going. Again, it's the same argument that I've reacted to before. Constitutional mandates don't seem to be recognized in our target. And yet, despite my protest, it has not been recognized. We're in the beginning of negotiation. I am sure the other body has recognized this request. But for the purposes of negotiation, I'll oppose this amendment. At this time, it's $22 million over our target at this time.
Any discussion, members? Seeing none, a roll call has been requested. Roll call.
Senator Limmer?
No.
Senator Anderson?
No.
Senator Dietzig?
Yes.
Senator Hall?
No.
Senator Ingebrigtsen? No. Senator Johnson? No. Senator Latz?
Yes.
Senator Pappas?
Yes.
Senator Ralph?
No.
Members with 6 yeses, and I'm sorry, 3 yeses and 6 noes, the motion is not passed. Senator Dietzig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have the A3 amendment.
Senator Dietzig moves the A3 amendment. That can be passed on.
Mr. Chair, would you like me to discuss it while it's being passed out?
Please do. Senator Dietzig.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So people might not understand there's a lot of random, very important things funded in this budget. We have a huge book here that's about an inch thick that goes through all the different items. And one of the things that is funded in this budget, or is a line item on this budget, is the Minnesota School Safety Centers. And so the center serves K-12 public, private, charter, and tribal schools as a resource to schools, law enforcement, public safety, emergency management, and community partners. They provide guidance, training, and technical assistance for best practice in all hazard safety school planning. The center coordinates, prevents, protects, mitigates, response, and recovery activities with federal, tribal, and local partners. Former Senator, current Commissioner John Harrington mentioned on how much they are doing to help the different schools throughout the state, especially as we come up in April where we've had some histories of school shootings. He said that this is a very needed funding. And this amendment restores a staff position reduced to budget constraints and adds additional staffing. Currently, they have a director, a school resource officer, coordinator, school safety assessment coordinator, and I believe this will add an emergency planning coordinator. They train schools for a variety of things, including multi-hazard emergency planning, threat assessment, active shooter, lockdown procedures, crisis communication, de-escalation strategies. I can go on and on. It is a good purpose. It is $250,000 each year. I think this is an important issue. And with that, I ask for your support, and I ask for a roll call vote recorded in the journal.
Roll call vote and recorded in the journal. I need 3 hands. Seeing 3, be recorded in the journal. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do recognize the need for school safety. In recent years. Right now, the budget, we tried to recognize that in education budgets last year. And due to the tactic of some who made a very large bill, it became a little too heavy for the governor to accept. So that bill was vetoed. In this case, the reason why this was not included was that in the K-12 budget, there's $75 million directed towards school safety and the allowance of local school districts to assess and to satisfy their needs. And that certainly makes this $500,000 kind of pale in comparison. And so we thought that the K-12 budget would be adequate enough, more than adequate enough, I hope, to satisfy this subject.
Senator Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Disick, where is the Minnesota School Safety Center?
Senator Disick?
Mr. Chair, I should know that, but I am not going to know it off the top of my head right now.
Mr. Backus?
Mr. Backus?
Mr. Chair and members, I could defer to Mr. Turner, but it's in the Department of Public Safety under the emergency management, I believe, but he can respond to that.
Mr. Turner says yes.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Anderson, I would imagine it's in St. Paul.
In St. Paul.
It's part of the Department of Public Safety. Is there anyone here who knows?
Big place.
Does anybody know where the Public Safety Center is?
You would know that.
Come up if you would, introduce yourself, and don't say it's in Minnesota.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members. My name is Joe Kelly. I am the Director of the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, and I am proud to say that the Minnesota School Safety Center resides in my division.
Located
at 445 Minnesota Street, Suite 223, St. Paul, Minnesota.
Thank you. Senator Pappas.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say I'm really very happy that I live next door to the School Safety Center. Sounds like a good, and Homeland Security. Sounds like a good place to be.
Senator Ingebretson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for bringing this amendment forward. As Chair Limmer said, we've been grappling over the last 2 or 3 years, for sure 3 years, about hardening of schools for safety and allowing the school boards statewide the opportunity to actually raise their levy, and I think they have done that to actually deal with school safety with SROs and I'm understanding that a lot of schools have done a great job already. And Senator Limmer, I think you're right. In our budget, we have $75 million, and the governor has nothing. So I'm quite concerned about that. Quite concerned of why he would have zero. And I think I think we're talking about school, the hardening of schools where he's at. So I don't quite understand that, but I think majority of us are feeling that there has to be still something moving forward. I think the last need that I did see was a request for $250 million or something like that, and that might have been a year ago. That was the actual need statewide, and so I don't know where that is now, but we're obviously dealing with that in other budgets. So just wanted to make that point.
Senator Disick has successfully asked for a roll call for the A3 amendment. The roll call will be taken.
Senator Limmer?
No.
Senator Anderson?
No.
Senator Dietzig?
Yes.
Senator Hall?
No.
Senator Ingebretson? No. Senator Johnson?
No.
Senator Latz?
Yes.
Senator Pappas?
Yes.
Senator Will?
No.
Members with 3 yeses and 6 noes, the motion does not pass. Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, I have the A13 amendment, please.
Senator Latz moves the A13 amendment. Would you like to speak to it?
Sure.
Senator Latz.
Mr. Chairman, the A13 amendment would fund the reestablishment of a corrections ombudsperson. This is $500,000 a year. We had a hearing in which the former ombudsperson for the state of Minnesota testified in support of it. The current commissioner of corrections testified in favor of it, recognizing that disputes that are not perceived to be taken objectively or fairly or seriously can fester and create all sorts of turmoil and problems within the offender population, and thereby threatens the safety of other offenders and our corrections officers. It's also simply unfair if those disputes are not resolved fairly for the offenders. I will say that I was reminded of this office and given the idea to bring the bill in this year when I received one of those letters at my home from an offender in one of our correctional facilities, like Senator Limmer receives letters at his home. Probably coincidentally, there was an article in Senator Anderson. I mean, these offenders, they're looking for help in lots of places, and, you know, they may or may not have a complaint which is true or legitimate. They may or may not have a complaint for which there's a remedy, but they certainly deserve to be heard. And especially when you start noticing that there are repeats of the similar complaints, you begin to wonder whether or not there's something more going on in a facility, whether there's a particular correctional officer that is not interacting in a good way with the offenders, or whether there are other offenders that are causing trouble that it's not getting addressed, or whether there's a grievance over the quality of the food that's not being addressed, which, you know, if you think about it, there are certain basics that human beings need, you know, clothing, shelter, and food, right? Well, they've got probably the same clothing almost every day in the correctional facility and the same shelter every day. But if the food is terrible, you're going to get a lot of grumbling about it. The bottom line is Commissioner Schnell, and I think the experience of the past ombudsperson and common sense would suggest that if you have an ombudsperson in place, you will have safer facilities. And this is a small price to pay for that. It's simply $1 million over 2 years. So I ask members to support this amendment. I ask for a roll call, and that will be recorded in the Journal.
Senator Latz is asked to be recorded in the Journal. I need 3 hands. 3 hands seen. It will be recorded. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Latz brings up a good discussion. I know for a fact that in a prison facility, small things become very big things over time. And it is true, I've received letters from inmates over the years, off and on. Sometimes it's just it is one of those little things that begin to raise the hackles of certain individuals. And you would think that it would be the complaints of perhaps pointing at a complaint of a correction officer, but oftentimes it's not. The concept of an ombudsman has kind of eluded Minnesota for many years. However, we have our limitation of our target, and I know the cost is relatively small. It should be something that we continue to discuss as we progress in this negotiation over our budget. But because it's over our budget target, I will have to oppose it for the time being.
Any questions, members? I believe a roll call was requested. Roll call be taken.
Senator Limmer?
No.
Senator Anderson?
No.
Senator Dietzig?
Yes.
Senator Hall?
No.
Senator Ingebrigtsen?
No.
Senator Johnson?
No.
Senator Latz?
Yes.
Senator Pappas?
Yes.
Senator Ralph?
No.
Members with 3 yeses and 6 no, the motion does not pass. Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have the A9 amendment.
Senator Pappas to the A9 amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, this would fund the Change Step program for veterans. I believe Senator Anderson brought this bill before us, and I think I've had the heartbreaking amendments here today. I think that this was a good bill that Senator Anderson brought forward to expand this program to serve more veterans who are struggling after they come back from military service. And for a lot of us do come from military families. I don't think I've ever shared this, but when I look back at my family, my grandfather served, my father, my uncle, my sister-in-law's nephew, my son-in-laws all served, and my husband all served in the military. And certainly, for those of us who have military veterans in our families, we know how stressful that service is. And especially in our more recent veterans, because after World War I and World War II, there was the long sea journey back, where veterans had the opportunity to talk to each other because they shared that experience, and kind of, it was like they had their own group therapy on the ship's back. But in more recent wars, they get on a plane and 24 hours later, they're back in civilian life. And they never really have a chance to really process what they went through and maybe find some healing. So programs like the Change Step program, I think, are just really essential. And then also, as someone who really cares about domestic violence, I hate to see the situation where our military veterans that we ask to serve and we admire them for their service, but yet they can't process what's happened to them, and they've been in extremely violent situations, so they lash out at their families. So I really hope that we will consider this bill seriously. It does break the budget, as the other bills do, but I think it's worth it. It's really, we should stand, as I said earlier, in solidarity behind our veterans. And, I'm not somebody that goes out there and waves the flag and appears at all the veterans events, much as my husband would like me to. But in this case, in this situation in particular, this really, really has touched my heart, and I ask for your support. I don't know, do we want a roll call? Yeah. Okay, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask for a roll call and have it be recorded, ask to have it recorded in the journal.
Senator Pappas asks to be recorded in the journal. I need 3 hands. 3 hands are seen. It will be recorded. Senator Limmer to the A9 amendment.
Mr. Chair, it's only for the reason of trying to satisfy our target that I would oppose this amendment.
Okay. Senator Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Pappas, for bringing the amendment forward, because this does affect a lot of veterans' families, and not just the families themselves, but the people that are surrounding them, and trying to bring back that individual, whether male or female, as far as reuniting them and trying to get help for them in processing after they've been through a horrific experience overseas. So I thank you for that. I thank you for recognizing the need for this, and I understand where the chairman's coming from. But I would challenge you to go with your husband to these rallies.
I'm sorry, Senator Pappas moves the A9 amendment. A roll call has been requested. Take the roll.
Senator Limmer?
No.
Senator Anderson?
Yes.
Senator Dietzick? Senator Hall?
No.
Senator Ingebrigtsen?
No.
Senator Johnson?
No.
Senator Latz?
Yes.
Senator Pappas?
Yes.
Senator Rel?
No.
Mr. Chair.
Members, with 4 yeses and 5 noes, the motion does not pass. Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to interject something here. I, too, am a veteran. And this bill, and this was very important to me. Unfortunately, we're faced with a situation, and I've been refraining from speaking out, but we've been going through a series of amendments that basically mirror the governor's recommendations. And while it's fine to make statements, and I believe that that's what we're trying to do here, about things that are important, the chairman has made some significant decisions to try to live within a budgetary target and a budgetary concept that is very difficult. It's very easy to have a large budget and work backwards. It is much more difficult to take a limited budget and try to choose the places where it is most important to put this money. We all know that this budget is still something that has got to be funded by the revenues of the state. And I'm very concerned that we are attempting to use this process to place people in a position of having to take votes that, number one, knowing that there is going to be a change, and number two, fails to recognize the budget process, which says, let's take the revenues that we have available or that we can project to have available and try to choose the most important places to put them, which is what I think we're trying to do here. This last vote was very troubling to me because I think it's an important piece of legislation. There are many pieces in this budget that are very important pieces of legislation. Corrections officers, safety. All of this is very important. And I'm very concerned that we are in some way distorting the object here, and that is to arrive at a budget that funds important things in this state and still recognizes the realities of the revenues that we generate and the projections that the budget office has provided us that tells us what we may expect in terms of revenues going forward. Every one of these amendments deals with an important issue. There's no question about it. And Lord, it would be lovely if we had the money to be able to do that, but we don't. So we have to make hard decisions. Sometimes making those decisions are prompted by a negotiation process or a process that says, well, we have things we agree upon, we have things we don't, and somewhere in the middle there we're going to have to find a common ground. So I just want to caution people not to read too much into what we are doing with each of these proposals that seeks to raise the budget beyond the original target that was set in a manner that doesn't give us time to weigh how that fits in and find some proportionality. I am sure the chairman has already said that number one, he's unhappy with this budget, as am I, but that he is willing to work with people to try to find that common ground. We have heard the governor's budget. We know what the governor wants. So I'm sorry, but I have to speak out on this because I feel that what we're doing here does not, in my opinion, move forward the process of finding common ground. Quite frankly, it turns it the other way. So I think we have to be very cautious. With that, I'll...
Members, any more discussion? Senator Latz?
Mr. Chairman, let's make no mistake about it. This is a cut budget. This is a cut budget in real terms, because if you don't at least increase agency budgets by the amount of inflation, then in real terms, after inflation is accounted for, people are taking home the same nominal dollar amount but with less purchasing power. It's a cut budget. And if inflation, I don't know, 2%, 2.5%, that's where this is what is in this budget. And as we heard some of the testimony, fixed costs also go up. So with a nominally level budget, just base going forward, and rising fixed costs, which an agency will have no choice but to pay, like for gas and electricity, then that makes it even harder. We simply cannot maintain our current service levels in this state government that we exist to provide to our citizens if in nominal terms we are simply advancing the base. And most of the budget we have before us simply advances the base into the next biennium. Now why? We're not in a deficit year. We're not being told that we have $1 billion or $2 billion or $5 billion shortfall between projected revenues and projected expenses. We don't have to cut. The cuts in here are a choice. It's a choice made by the majority caucus of the Senate and passed on to this committee. Why are we treating this like it's a deficit budget? I'll be honest with you. I'm embarrassed for the chair because I know that the chair does not like this budget. And I would probably be accurate if I said that every member of the majority on this committee does not like this budget. Then why do we have it in front of us? Why is this the budget that we have to vote on? Why doesn't the majority put forward a budget that makes more sense given our current fiscal situation? Much of what we do in this committee is prevention related, or ought to be prevention related. We spend all this money, as has already been said, on corrections, on cleaning up the mess after it's been made. Well, we will pay, whether it's in this budget or some future budget, or we will pay in the form of externalities later. And by externalities, I mean we'll have more crime victims. We will have a revolving door in the prisons and in the courts. More customers, if you will, more demand for services. Those are human costs. Those are financial costs. We will pay eventually if we don't pay for the prevention in this budget now. With more crime victims, you'll have more financial loss in those families. You'll have more families that are devastated in one way or another as well. Now, we have certain revenue projections, and we as a legislature can decide whether we want to accept those revenue projections and live within those revenue projections. Are we going to accept the size of the pie that's handed to us, or if we want to change the size of the pie? That's a choice that we make as a legislature. So I don't accept what Senator Ralph said, that we are boxed in to this strict number that has been given to us as an overall budget for the state in the next biennium. We decide the size of the pie because we have the power to do that. We also decide how to prioritize our expenditures within that pie. So even if we accept the size of the pie as given, we can decide how much is going to go into judiciary and public safety, and how much is going to go into K-12, and how much is going to go into the Department of Human Services. We decide that. And apparently the powers that be within the majority caucus have decided that judiciary, public safety, corrections, Department of Human Rights are going to have, in effect, a cut budget, nominally an increase of $25 million, which is an absolute drop in the bucket of a almost $50 billion state budget. Think about it, $25 million in a $48 or $49 billion biennial budget for this state. And we are here arguing over whether or not we ought to fund a program to help our veterans coming back to prevent domestic violence, to save their families as well as themselves. We're arguing over whether or not we're going to have enough money to staff the Department of Corrections to save the lives of our corrections officers and other offenders that are living in those facilities. And whether or not we're going to have the funding to treat them so when they go back into their home communities, they aren't reoffending and creating more victims. Why are we even arguing about that? The budget is the ultimate moral document. It's not just about do we agree with the governor. It's about what morals do we bring to the table? Because the money that we spend reflects those philosophical and moral priorities. And the budget that we have before us today, under the chairman's authorship, is the Senate majority's preferred budget. I don't accept that as simply a negotiating ploy. If so, then this whole process is built on a farce. All we're doing is throwing numbers out there because we have to throw numbers out there, but we're not going to accept any of it because at the end of the process, we're going to come back with a different number. Well, maybe we will, and maybe some of these priorities will get funded. And if in the spirit of compromise, compared to the moral document that's going to come from the other body, maybe we end up somewhere in the middle. But there's also a very strong moral statement being made by the Senate majority that has constrained these budgets, which is that there have to be tax refunds or tax cuts. How much of the budget is going to be devoted to that? How much is the $80 or whatever I might get back at the end of a tax refund season that I'm going to be able to go out and spend to fund this veterans program? I can't do it alone. I'd have to pool it. I'd have to take my money and pool it with all of the other taxpayers in Minnesota to come up with the $400,000 a year to pay for that Change Step program. And the same with an ombudsperson in the Department of Corrections, and the same with school safety centers. I mean, we're talking about saving the lives of our kids, and we can't even add $250,000 a year to help our schools become safer because we've got this fealty to some other budget priorities in some other part of the budget that we don't see in this committee? I don't accept that. The budget that we're going to vote on in a few minutes is a moral document. This is the moral statement of the Senate majority that we have before us. For me, this is an immoral document, an immoral budget. I can't in good conscience vote for it. Can you?
Mr. Chair.
Senator Rolfe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since I was referred to by name, I guess I'd like to respond. First of all, let me make something perfectly clear. A statement was made that we should have a budget that makes sense or makes more sense. I would make the same charge both to the other body and to the governor in the budget that he proposed. I don't think that budget made sense. Very simple. So to try and take the moral high ground and say that this budget does not make moral sense ignores the realities that we as legislators face when we're provided with an impossible document to deal with. I agree with much of what you say, Senator Latz. I think we need to look at things that are important in our budget. But as we go forward, and in the negotiations, and you and I both have been through many negotiations, know that one can take an unreasonable position in order to achieve a result. But if that position is so unreasonable that it lacks credibility, it destroys the process. And I have to say that the budget that was put before us was unreasonable to the point where, in my mind, it lacked credibility. And that is why we are faced with the situation that we have today, which is sad in my mind. I've been in this legislature for 2.5 years and have been very troubled by the budget process, because we seem to have to take these extreme positions in order to arrive at what you probably would have, okay, yeah, this looks like a good idea, let's go forward with it. I want to honor the committee process. I want us to discuss these things. I think it's great that you bring these amendments forward, but I think bringing them forward with expecting us to adopt all of them is not realistic and is not a statement of my moral position on the particular issues at hand. It is my statement on the practicalities of how do we finally get to a place where we can fund this government so that it can go forward. So I take some umbrage when I am accused of taking a budget that makes no sense when I'm presented with one of the same kind. So I want to go forward. I think most people in this committee and most people know me in this legislature as a person who seeks compromise, who seeks solutions, who is not a person of no. I don't want to be a person of no in this. And I take the chairman at his word when he says that as we go forward, we will be looking at things to try and arrive at a compromise that is good for everyone. And that we can say, yes, we have done what we should do in terms of a legislature. And the relationship that this committee has to the rest of the budget also has to be kept in mind. I sit on another committee where we have an even lower target. And it's criminal. I'm very disappointed in that. But it's the realities that we have to deal with. Oh, that we would come in and say, yeah, here's our budget. Boy, there's a lot of good things in it. Let's go forward with it. Well, here's your budget. There's a lot of good things in it. Let's try and come together. But we don't seem to be able to do that. And that is what I was trying to say before. I'm very troubled by it. I appreciate your comments, Senator Latz. We've always done well together. And I hope that we can go forward. But I do have to say that there are forces operating here that go beyond what's taking place in this particular chamber. And I want us to be aware of them and be aware of that the decisions we make here may or may not be dictated by the thoughts and the beliefs of this committee. Thank you.
Senator Limmer.
Mr. Chair, before I move the bill, just wanted a few closing comments. We've had a very good discussion here today, and quite honestly, I want to commend everyone for participating. I wish, and quite honestly, as far as the discussion is concerned, we've covered just about everything in our budget, and there was a hope by some that we would spend more money in some directions, and quite honestly, I have some secret hopes too. But nevertheless, our conversation actually has been fairly detailed, and it's been gritty at times, and I believe it's been honest. And if anyone is watching our deliberations today, I hope they feel at least well served that we aren't just sitting back and taking assumptions blindly and then voting on things. This process I've come to really love, and it's something that you got to peel back the onion skin on it, and you've got to rip into some of the details. And for all the people that serve the state of Minnesota that are sitting in the audience behind me, I have just a tremendous respect for the work they do. I think we all do. I think I can say that safely. One of the difficulties that we had in this particular division of funding is that the governor's proposal is at 9.6% increase in spending. If we use the figure of inflation that was used earlier at 2.25% per year, that's almost 4 times the rate of inflation that the governor is wanting us to spend. Now, granted, there may be some spikes in there that need to be addressed with a little extra money, but there's other areas that I quite honestly could find that doesn't need an increase. And so, and in some of the very small dollar amounts, we didn't, and they didn't ask for it. But nevertheless, if I try to remind people this is the beginning of a very long negotiation on the budget with the House and with the governor. And so we're going to start out a little low. It's not where I think we're going to end up. And like I said before, we got nowhere else to go but up. So with that, Mr. Chair, I move Senate File 802 as amended and be recommended to pass and move to the Finance Committee.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I'd like to have a roll call and have it recorded in the journal.
Seen 3 hands?
I would agree with that too.
We see 3. We see a lot more than 3. It'll be recorded in the journal. A roll call has been requested. If the staff could take the roll.
Senator Limmer,
Yes.
Senator Anderson,
Yes.
Senator Dietzick, Senator Hall,
Yes.
Senator Ingebrigtsen, Senator Johnson,
Yes.
Senator Latz,
No.
Senator Pappas, Senator Ralph.
Yes. Members with 6 yeses and 3 noes, the Senate File 802 as amended moves to the Finance Committee. It is passed. Seeing no further business, we are, Senator? Yes, we are adjourned.